Hello, and welcome to VR Download. As you may know, if you tried to tune in yesterday, we did attempt to do a VR download from AWE. We were all set up. We were both there physically in person. Ian and I sitting beside each other with Quest headsets good to go. We had figured out three separate internet connection strategies. We had a Starlink Mini, we had 5G tethering, and we had the terrible internet of the hotel. For some reason, all of these hotels had really appalling internet. We were all ready to go. And just at that time, as you may have seen in the tech news, Google Cloud went down, taking out parts of Cloudflare with it. And unfortunately, including on the Google Cloud side, the back end for our studio. Truly terrible timing of all the times for that to happen, of all the weeks, the one just as we were about to do our first ever technically in person, though for you, the viewers, it wouldn't have changed that much, except that Ian and I would have a lot lower audio latency because we were using our speakers muted. So I was looking forward to that, but unfortunately, you know, timing sometimes is not on our side. That was very unfortunate, and then I had to go to the airport. So deeply frustrating, but it is what it is, and we're going to have this conversation today instead, now that I'm back. So, having a little trouble seeing the live chat. I can now see it. Yep, I can see it. So we have Prempy, Siegfried, the DIY movies, Quinton M. Good to see you all. I'm sure some people will be flowing in as we get into the show. So let's start by saying a warm thank you to all of our members, both on the website and on YouTube. We appreciate you all, as well as, of course, our UploadVR patrons, XR Developer News, Podum of Smash Drums, HoloNet, Mike Manzano, Richard Meller, Parmesan, and Qubits. So thank you, all of you, for your support. It's been a week. I was covering WWDC at Apple Park earlier in the week, and then I traveled to Los Angeles to cover AWE, where we had some big announcements that we're going to discuss today. We're going to have, I think, three sections here with one kind of orphan story that's not in either of the sections. We'll start with some meta news. We want to just briefly discuss the significance of Deadpool VR being announced for the platform and talk about Quest V77 rolling out with bugs despite the pledge of Meta CTO to increase, or should I say, improve quality control processes. So once we're finished that meta section, we're going to discuss a Windows MR news story. You didn't perhaps think that there would be another one, given that Microsoft, of course, removed support for Windows MR in Windows 11 late last year. But a lone Microsoft employee, one of their biggest proponents of Windows MR and OpenXR specifically back in the day, is now working on a SteamVR driver to bring back Windows MR headsets. So they will work just as if they were a native SteamVR headset. This will be free, not open source for reasons we'll talk about, but it is expected to be free. And just to be crystal clear, this isn't someone who still works at VR on Microsoft. They are on the Xbox team. This is something they're doing in their spare time. But it's still significant that it's a lone rogue Microsoft employee bringing these headsets back. And it shows, if Microsoft really cared, they could have done this themselves. Of course, if they really cared, they wouldn't be removing the support from the OS in the first place. But we can get into that when we get into it. Then we'll talk about those two big pieces of news from AWE. If you're wondering, why do I keep saying this acronym? What is AWE? What does that mean? It's just Augmented World Expo. It's a huge kind of conference in this industry that takes place every year, and it's particularly focused around AR, Augmented World Expo, but of course, with pass through on VR style headsets now, the definition of what they cover and what's included in this kind of conference is obviously a lot wider than it was before. But the two pieces of news are very much so to do with glasses, transparent AR optics, and glasses with no optics at all yet. Firstly, Qualcomm revealing the Snapdragon AR1 Plus chip for high-end smart glasses. We'll talk about why we think that could be the chip that will arrive in Meta's Hypernova glasses, the HUD glasses, in October. The other piece of news, arguably, almost outshining Apple's visionOS 6 announcement, but not quite because this is only a tease. Snap, the company behind Snapchat, proclaiming that they will launch consumer AR glasses called Specs in 2026. They've had 2 dev kits now. Before that, they had actually Ray-Ban Meta style glasses they sold to the public. Just camera glasses. They weren't the audio use case. They weren't the AI use case, but they were camera glasses. So no more dev kit next year. They're claiming it's going to be a real product that you can go out and buy next year. Actual, fully standalone, no puck, no battery, everything in the glasses, in a lightweight pair of glasses, AR. That's a massive claim. We will get into why that's a massive claim and what we think Snap could or couldn't deliver next year. The reasons for optimism, the reason for pessimism. We'll dig into that. Finally, we will finish by discussing Apple. All of the announcements at WWDC centered around visionOS 26. If you're wondering, hang on, how did they go from 2 to 26? Maybe if you're not an Apple user or you're not interested in Apple at all, you may have not seen, but at WWDC, they've moved all of their operating systems to a year-based naming scheme. So 26 there standing for 2026. If you're then wondering, hang on, we're in 2025, it's the same way that like when a new car model comes out, it's the year plus one model because the majority of the lifespan of visionOS 26 will occur through 2026. It's set to launch in fall, so it'll only be out for the kind of the last quarter of 2025 and then out for 3 quarters of 2026 before presumably we see a visionOS 27. Based on their naming scheme, that's what it should be next. But you never want to presume anything because we could have come on here and discussed all about visionOS 3 before, and then now that's not the correct term for it. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff to discuss about visionOS 26. It is truly a massive, massive update. And we, as you know on this show, are huge fans of visionOS. And with visionOS 26, they've taken, a lot of the low-hanging fruit and implemented it. They've shipped some stuff we didn't think was going to be possible to ship in this headset without new hardware. They've pulled it off. Developers are incredibly happy about what they can do because there's a bunch of capabilities that they weren't able to implement beforehand that they now can thanks to new APIs. And I think, as I think we've named this YouTube live stream, I think this really does set the foundations for Apple's future. We've seen all the widespread discussion about the liquid glass redesign for their flat screen traditional devices and how that's pointing towards a future of headsets and glasses. And I think a lot of the technical foundations of how this is going to work in your day-to-day life are starting to emerge there in visionOS 26. So yeah, this is very, very exciting. And I think, again, it shows what we've been saying on this show, that if you were to follow the mainstream tech media's idea of visionOS and Vision Pro, you might even think it was cancelled, that Apple was going to not even announce a new version of the OS, never mind the biggest update yet by far with some absolutely fundamental changes, So how quickly we go from that narrative of Apple's discontinued Vision Pro and given up on visionOS to, wow, at WWDC, I was present there in the crowd. The biggest cheer was for visionOS compared to any of the other operating systems. And yeah, I'm very interested to get into that and to discuss the whole landscape. So yeah, I think we have quite a few people in the audience. Hello to Siegfried, greeting, the DIY Movies, Fmeister94, Casey Chiefs, Onakazi, Guy Godin, the developer of Virtual Desktop. And I think I said hello already to Quentin M and Preppy. So, yep, let's just get straight into this, starting with that meta section of the show. As I say quite often, this is not a game show, the VR download, not my specialty to discuss gameplay in particular, but we do note when gaming as a kind of, when gaming related VR news signifies something about the industry. So if you somehow missed it, Meta has announced their next Blockbuster Quest exclusive VR game, and it's Marvel's Deadpool VR, voiced by Neil Patrick Harris, not Ryan Reynolds, but Ryan Reynolds did post quite a funny video on his social channels, this kind of pretending to react to this news in quite a dramatic way. So I think the significance here is that it's quite clear that, at least in the short term, none of us can know the minds of Meta executives in the far future. It's quite clear that the people who expected that Meta was already giving up on VR gaming, that Batman Arkham Shadow would be the last AAA game, and from here on it would only be, Candy Crush in mixed reality, or, some kind of slop for children in Horizon Worlds. That's clearly not the case. This is not a mixed reality game. This is a fully virtual reality game. There is no mixed reality element to this at all, as far as I'm aware. Maybe they add some in future, but right now there is no mixed reality elements to this game. It is also not running in Horizon Worlds. It is a, full game engine application that you download from the store for a price. It's not microtransactions. It is very much so a traditional single player VR game. It's not even a multiplayer, live service. It's a single player action adventure, set number of hours you play the game for, title. So I think it'll be very interesting to see what the reaction is to this. Do they bundle it with Quest 3S and Quest 3 this holiday season? Seems quite likely. Of existing Quest 3 and Quest 3S owners, how many purchase it? Is it any good, right? So Ian Hamilton, my colleague, obviously normally here, I'm just speaking to people who don't normally watch the show, has tried this out. He said it felt great on Quest 3. It uses a cell shading art style, which some people don't like. I appreciate that, but others do. And he said it looked really good and felt really good on Quest. I wonder, can we show cell shaded art on YouTube and not have kind of the violent gore content? I'll see if I can find maybe a screenshot that's not quite so gory compared to others, because some of them are, and you can see the kind of art style, at least just for general reference, if you haven't seen the game so far. Siegfried is saying, were there any rumors about this game, or did it come out of nowhere? So there did seem to leak about a week beforehand. Before that, though, there was not any rumor that I had heard, other than the fact that Twisted Pixel Games, which is one of Meta's studios, was working on some kind of game. So this is, to be clear, a first-party game from a Meta-owned Oculus studio, which, I mused before that it's quite funny to say that you could technically say the sentence, or at least the sentence fragment, Meta's Oculus Studios, Twisted Pixels, Marvel's Deadpool VR, and that would be accurate. There's a lot of kind of companies involved here. It's Meta, which owns Oculus Studios, which owns Twisted Pixel, and then the game itself is using Deadpool, which is from Marvel, so it's Marvel's Deadpool. Kind of quite funny. So I think what I want to get to, the point I'm trying to make here, is that I think all narratives that try to say the future of this is this one thing, the future of A is X, the only future is this, the focus, the only thing is this. And I point this out all the time on the show. It's a really appealing narrative. It's great for headlines, right? I mean, if we really wanted to get a bunch of clicks, we could come up with, this is exactly what this is. The only thing this company cares about is X or Y or Z. But the reality is that companies can do more than one thing. And if you want to scale a new medium, a new computing platform, a new paradigm of technology, it can't be one thing. It has to be multiple things. You have to appeal to children. Yeah, you have to have your, I am cat and Roblox style stuff for kids. You also have to appeal to adults. You have to appeal to all cohorts. You have to appeal to people who want to use these headsets as a giant movie theater. You have to appeal to people who want to, do active fitness and active gaming, where they're working out as much as they would be at the gym in terms of how much they're exerting their body, and people who want to never, ever stand up. It has to be in the entire spectrum. So I do think that VR gaming of this kind is going to continue to be a focus for Meta, but it's not going to be their only focus. They're going to have all kinds of focuses. And sure, if you're a small company, you carve out a niche and you do focus on one thing. But if you're a tech giant that wants to own a platform for general purpose computing across the entire spectrum, it needs to be all of these things at once. So Eric S. is asking a question that kind of relates to our last show last week where we discussed Meta's next headset. This week, we're not going to discuss that too much for two reasons. One, that we discussed it a lot last week, and two, that we just have so many things from other companies to discuss. But you're asking for a quick kind of summary of last week's episode in saying, is it true that Meta's next headset is not a traditional Quest 4, is your question. And the answer to that is that according to the sources we've spoken to, and this seems to be corroborated by, the Wall Street Journal, as well as VR enthusiasts like Luna and Brad Lynch, who seem to have heard quite similar stuff. Meta's next headset for next year will be an ultralight headset, so about a fifth of the weight of a Quest 3. Really astonishing weight reduction. With an open periphery design, meaning by default, it does not have like a facial interface like on a Quest that is, covering your entire face. You can see out the sides and out the bottom and the main pressures on your forehead, and with a tethered compute puck. So whether you call that standalone is down to terminology. Sometimes we say it's not fully standalone. I would still say it's standalone because to me, the definition of standalone is, can you use this product without another device that isn't included in the box? And sure, by technicality, some people are going to say, oh, but you need a phone to set up a Quest headset. Sure, but that's more a decision by Meta on a software level. So to kind of formalize this, for the technical sticklers, and I love you, I love to be technically precise on this show. I think we should. Any headset that you can use after initial setup with only what's included in the box is standalone to me. You don't need a console, a PS5, or a PC, or something like that after setup. The actual fundamental operations of the device don't require. So this would still be standalone in that definition, right? You're carrying around the compute puck, which is tethered to the headset, plus the headset, and with just that combination, you can go around and have a computing device that doesn't require anything else. But it's not fully standalone in that, if you were to somehow forget that compute puck, the headset itself is not capable of anything, as far as our sources and I don't think anyone disagrees on this. The information first reported about this headset about 9 months ago, when they described its codename Puffin. So, we are quite, Onakazi is saying that's the rumor, one of which I am dubious. We are quite confident that this is the case. We do not report something like this unless we have multiple sources, is what I will say. Often we do cite other people's reports and then we don't know what their sourcing is, but this is something where this was a first party UploadVR report of our sources to us. We are quite confident that Meta's current plan, which could change at any time, is this. And then the acceleration of this program, because it was originally supposed to come out in 2027, it's been accelerated to try to get it out in 2026. This has come alongside the cancellation of the two primary candidates for a traditional Quest 4. So that would have been a Quest 4 and Quest 4S that would have been the same kind of form factor as Quest 3, just, the same thing again, right? You can make the obvious conclusions. Doubling the GPU power again, from Quest 1 to 2 to 3, you had a doubling of GPU power, including, as well as obviously improvements to CPU, NPU, RAM, addition of eye tracking, miniaturization, improvements in cameras, all of these kind of things that you would have expected by just take the same idea of Quest 2 to Quest 3 and continue that same tech path. That's what Meta has cancelled the primary candidates for. However, there are still candidates for a traditional form factor Quest 4 that are in the works that would likely arrive around 2027. Again, I want to be crystal clear that Meta's plans are not as concrete as you would like if you want to have a definitive idea of what is coming, what year, what exactly is it. It doesn't really work like that. As Meta CTO has pointed out many times, they work on a bunch of different headsets in parallel. Some of them get to the end state of being released, very few, but most of them get cancelled at some point in this process. Some point, whether it be at the very early prototyping stage or right before mass production. And Meta has cancelled headsets right before mass production in the past. So At some point during this process, these headsets get cancelled. But right now, as it stands with current plans, that is Meta's kind of general schedule. And there is an assumption here that like the headset next year won't be called Quest, but 2 points on that. Firstly, Meta has not decided on the names. There's been discussions, but they have not decided on it. Secondly, there's no reason that this couldn't still be called a Quest. And this headset would still, to be clear, that the compute puck that this headset has, this tethered puck, it would still be running the same Horizon OS. So any app that runs on your Quest today, if it supports hand tracking, it should run on this headset next year. A massive open question is, and I think I saw someone ask at the very start of the show, will it support touch controllers? That's a great question. I don't know. I haven't seen anyone that claims to know. In theory, I don't see why it wouldn't as a sold separately accessory. You can imagine Meta selling a pair of touch controllers for $100. I'm just spitballing here in terms of pricing and strategy, but it would seem strange not to. The one concern would be that the headset, because it's so light, may be optimized for a narrower 6-stop tracking volume. So you may not get as wide controller tracking, right? Quest 3 has these cameras that are kind of pointing out to the sides that can see very far backwards. You can kind of see here, but so maybe you can pair controllers, but you're not getting the full kind of range. But as we did point out last week, if you are looking for a traditional upgrade to your Quest 3, right? You just want the same thing you have, but with eye tracking, maybe a faster chip, maybe better displays. Our understanding is that the Asus ROG headset, their Republic of Gamers headset that they're working on, running Meta Horizon OS, is essentially that. So our understanding is that the Asus ROG headset will be like the Quest 3 Plus that never was, right? Like Quest 3, but better display, eye tracking, a higher end product because it's not trying to be $500, probably very roughly on the order of $1,000, but that's very roughly, very, very roughly on the order of. I'm not saying it's going to be $1,000. I'm saying don't expect it to be a Quest 3 price, but also don't expect it to be Apple Vision Pro price, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. So that's kind of a quick rundown of last week's news, just so we're kind of clear. Let me see if there's in the comments here. Gigodin is saying hand tracking is still a gimmick. It's better than when it launched, but still terrible for most interactions. That's an interesting take. So I think where hand tracking really works well is in combination with eye tracking. So hand tracking on its own, the issue is that in addition to the kind of lack of precision compared to controllers, it is exerting, right? So if you're trying to directly touch an interface, you have your hands up in the air like this, you're poking virtual buttons. That's very cool for the first 20 seconds, but that actually gets quite tiring. It's the gorilla arm phenomenon we've talked about before. Holding your arm up like this is not comfortable. It's the reason that, even when you try to use a tablet as a computer, often you want to use, a keyboard and a mouse, not just for the tactility reasons, but so you can keep your arms rested. If you don't believe me, if you think this sounds crazy, hold your arms up like this and see how long you can keep them up before you feel, I don't want my arms up in the air anymore from your body. It's kind of a fundamental ergonomic issue with hand tracking on its own. Where hand tracking becomes incredibly powerful is in combination with eye tracking. So Apple Vision Pro uses this interaction system called gaze and pinch. You point with your eyes, you look at things with your eyes, UI elements, objects, whatever, and then you pinch with your finger. But your hand doesn't have to be up in the air. It can be rested down above your thigh or wherever, on a table, on a chair. And so your hand is only performing the pinch, right? It doesn't even need to know the position of your hand unless you're doing things like resizing or dragging where it's only the relative position compared to where you started pinching. This gaze and pinch input system, once you use it for the first time, it's quite clear that this is the future default interaction method for XR. And I can tell you, the information has reported this, we've reported this, this will be the default interaction method for Meta's headset next year, as well as the entire industry. This is the input system that the industry wants. The only reason that every headset doesn't have it right now is because eye tracking is not a standard feature on every headset, right? Once it is, and you have eye tracking, this is going to be the default way that you interact with interfaces. and I say default here, I'm not saying this makes controllers go away. Controllers, as we will discuss later in the show, which Vision Pro is adding support for, right, are invaluable for certain use cases, especially for kind of hardcore serious gaming. But when you're talking about like how do you just use the interface to change settings, open a browser window, move some files around, bring up a Netflix video to watch, it's clear that like this is the default, right? What the touchscreen was to kind of mobile interfaces, this gaze and pinch system is for XR as a default. But just in the same way, you might pair a gamepad to your phone or use one of those clip-on attachments to turn your phone into like a handheld portable. You're always going to want to bring in more accessories for specific use cases, which, yeah, we'll talk about. So we've gone a lot into this topic, but I do think it's important because the strategy of Meta is clearly changing here in the short term in terms of hardware. It doesn't mean, again, coming back to the Deadpool comment, that this is everything they care about, right? It's not like, oh, well, now they don't care about controllers anymore. Again, as far as we're aware, this will still be sold alongside Quest 3. There will still be this Asus ROG headset that is the traditional, VR style system. And then the year after, there still would be a traditional form factor, a Quest that tries to kind of be the middle ground, the jack of all trades. Having a look at some of the comments here. I think we're ready to get into the next topic here. I think I see some people saying that they're not fans of hand tracking, but they do agree that when it's combined with eye tracking on Vision Pro, it's quite clear that that is kind of the way to go for default interaction systems here. Yeah. So our next topic, of course, is the V77 update of Quest's Horizon OS, rolling out with bugs that Meta knew about and still rolled the OS out anyway. So let's see if I can bring this up. So you may remember a few episodes ago on the show, we discussed how there were many developers discussing performance regressions in Horizon OS. That means that with each version, the average frame rate of their apps was decreasing. Simultaneously, Meta had rolled out this really puzzling change to battery saver that kind of capped the frame rate at 45 FPS, which is just so misguided that, as I said at the time, whoever had that idea clearly does not understand the basic fundamentals of VR and MR. As well as this, developers had been reporting, as they have been for years, critical bugs that were constantly getting in the way of them shipping and kind of supporting their users on Quest. On the user side, of course, you will also notice that this is not a bug-free OS, to put it lightly. As I've said before, we have to sometimes stop and acknowledge that, like, I would wager that most people in the comments would agree that of the consumer electronics devices in your home that are made by so-called serious major tech companies, the Quest is the buggiest. I don't have these kind of bugs with my PlayStation or my Nintendo Switch or, my Android TV or iPad or MacBook, right? If you insert whatever tech devices you care about and use, yes, you could argue that, of course, a standalone VR headset is a lot more technically complicated than these things. There are so many things that have to happen together. These are running on mobile chips, and it's remarkable that this is even possible. Sometimes we have to stop and remember that, only around a year or two before Quest, far less than a decade ago, people were still saying that this would be impossible, that you could never actually pull off really high quality, high reliability, high precision, low latency, low drift, positional head and hand tracking or controller tracking on a mobile chipset while running a VR experience. There were a lot of people who I remember, because I was there, who said this whole idea of trying to do full 6DoF VR on mobile chips is doomed. It's not going to work. It's crazy. Once you start doing this in the real world with real use cases, it's all going to fall apart. So on one hand, it's a challenge, but on the other hand, that's not an excuse for a shipping system this many years later on the third gen product, the Quest 3, with tens of millions of users in the ecosystem now. Um, it's not a valid excuse, especially when Pico 4 doesn't have these bugs. Okay, a very similar headset in terms of same kind of chipsets, same OS fundamental architecture at the core, AOSP. Apple Vision Pro does not have these bugs. Um, of course, Apple has the advantage of kind of end-to-end control. So all this comes down to say that Meta CTO at the time, this was maybe around a month ago, publicly pledged in an Instagram Ask Me Anything session that they were going to take this really seriously. He said the company was taking seriously these concerns, uh, that Meta was spending time on it, doing the work to solve it, and that he did. I don't think he said the word sorry, but it was essentially like an apology, and we're going to do better. And so the new update here to the story is that after saying all this, they have rolled out V77 with more bugs that they knew were there. And so you see kind of on screen, if you're watching rather than listening, Bosworth, the CTO of Meta, is asked, why are people mad at you on the Bird app, referring to, X, formerly Twitter. And he starts by saying, for good reason, in his answer. He says, our quality control hasn't been where we need it to be. We actually saw these issues in PTC for reasons I can't get into. We had to roll anyways. And then I'll just read out his full response after this. He says, people say, how could you do it? Well, these bugs don't affect a huge number of people. They do affect devs, who I care about a lot, and they do affect a specific set of people who I care about a lot. We're working on the fixes. Some of them require firmware updates from Qualcomm, and so there's a process we're going through there. We're working with urgency on this. We're not happy about it. There's a bunch of reasons we had to proceed anyways, and it's a measured call with some benefits and some costs. But we shouldn't even be in a position to make that call because we should have much better quality control sooner. It's a process. We're working on it. My commitment to that hasn't faded at all. So, in fairness to Bosworth, this was not a, you're all wrong, this isn't a thing. He starts by saying, people are mad at him for good reason. So we'll start by acknowledging that he has accepted the issue. But that was what happened last month, right? And there was this big pledge, we're working on it. It's just so ironic, I guess, is the closest word I can think of in my current sleep-deprived state, that a month later they then ship out another update with more bugs. And there's this kind of allusion to, we had to do it anyway. It was the lesser of two evils. If you're in a situation like that, clearly something has gone very wrong. So, I believe him that they want to get this solved, because it is one of the biggest issues with the Quest as a device, as a product. The software quality is just not there on both the developer side and on the consumer side often. Like, we all know this from using our headset, right? Like, it's just that the software quality is not what you would ever expect from a consumer product. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel good. There's sometimes you're doing fundamental things and it just breaks in ways that are sometimes repeatable, sometimes random. And even when things do work right, there's a jankiness to it. I had to add my user profile onto Dawn's Quest to get our stream set up yesterday. And there's just so many like cutouts where the whole screen goes black and everything kind of janks back into play for a second and the audio fades in and it works at the end, but it's not smooth or seamless. It feels like someone's hackathon project, not a shipping serious consumer OS that wants to take on visionOS and Android XR. So I think this is a story we'll really have to follow up. Is it really the case that Meta is going to take this seriously? Are they going to pull this off? Are we going to be in a place where, by next year we all say, this is obviously the optimistic scenario here to be clear, oh, you remember when Quest used to be buggy? And I'm so glad that Meta has kind of got their shit together. Or will we sit here in a year and say, damn, how on earth is this still so buggy? How did they not get their shit together? And only time's going to tell. So far, it's not looking good. If we're just going past performance, it's not looking good. The tension here that I've brought up before, that Bosworth assures the world is not the problem, and I've seen other people, software engineers who were previously at Meta, insist that this is not the problem, but is the pace of updates. Obviously, as we're about to discuss later in the show for Vision Pro, Apple and Google do the majority of their major changes in a yearly release, and then they do smaller releases that have occasional features. Whereas Meta does not have one big yearly release. There's nothing like that at Meta. They don't do it like that. They release monthly updates roughly for Horizon OS that each have, a chunk of features. And over time, the platform changes. And it does mean that Meta ships faster, right? The features coming to Quest compared to when it launched are beyond anything else. Sometimes people, ask like, how come you cover like Quest so much? Because they add so damn much. Every month they add features. If you bought a Quest 2 at launch, by the time it got to the end of its time on the market, it was a completely different software experience with a bunch of different features that weren't there. With the original Quest, even more, as I always point out, the original Quest didn't launch with link or hand tracking. You bought a headset at launch that was standalone only. Officially, of course, there were unofficial apps for this, like Godin's Virtual Desktop and ALVR, but officially standalone only. And by the time it gets to the end, it has, so it was standalone only with controllers only. By the end, it has hand tracking, depth correct pass through, and official link support for PC VR. So there are good examples of this. Quest 3, for example, if you want to go closer to the present, the pass through on Quest 3 was dramatically worse than the pass through today. If you only got a Quest 3 in the past year or 6 months or whatever, you may not know. Like, it was a lot worse. If you think the pass through is bad currently, that's a fair opinion, but it's a lot better than it was. And it improved in ways we didn't even think was possible. So I'm going to give them credit of that, but I still think it's a remarkable coincidence that the one device I have that is the one that is updated the most frequently, that does the monthly updates instead of the yearly ones, is the one that's so buggy and unstable after these updates. But again, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe these are just results of the same core cause, right? The same reason that it's the same core cause, but they're not directly related in that they could still find a way to pull off these frequent updates without having these bugs. We'll have to see. We'll have to see. A lot of more people in the comments here. Great to see everyone. It has been quite a week, but there are a lot of big updates in this industry. Let's see. Black Market Honey saying good evening from sunny Sweden. Nice to see where everyone's tuning in for. Do let us know where you're tuning in from. Let's go on to our next topic here. So we're going to discuss that Windows MR news. And if you've just joined us and you're wondering, what are we talking about? When are we getting to each topic? We've just now finished our meta section. We're going to now talk about the Windows MR SteamVR driver that's coming. Then we'll discuss the AWE, Augmented World Expo news. That's Qualcomm's new chip and Snapchat's announcement of AR glasses. And then we will discuss visionOS 26. So yeah, that Windows MR news is really quite significant. If I can find it here. Yeah. So if you don't know what Windows MR is, it was Microsoft's PC VR platform. Despite the name, it was VR. So you had, when this was released in 2017, you had the Oculus Rift platform with the Rift Store and the Rift hardware. You had the SteamVR ecosystem, right, with Valve's Steam, SteamVR, HTC Vive, and then you saw their kind of headsets start to emerge there over time. And Microsoft wanted its own because it owns Windows. It thought, we should have our own platform. We should be the platform holder here. VR should be a built-in feature in Windows, and a bunch of different manufacturers should be able to support it. And it shouldn't be, one headset from one company, and they should all be super affordable. So they launched Windows MR, and you have, Acer, Asus, HP, Dell, Lenovo, and Samsung come out with headsets. And let's give Windows MR credit for one thing, right? Well, a few things, but let's be clear. This was the first consumer headsets to ship with 6DoF inside-out headset and controller tracking. Inside-out tracking. This was 2 years before Quest and Rift S. 2 years before Rift S, these headsets were doing this kind of tracking. Back when, for room scale on the Oculus Rift, you had to plug in these USB sensors that were not really designed to be wall mounted, but you could. And you would need maybe 3 or 4 of them for a proper uh, full room scale coverage. USB issues were quite common because most motherboards, fun fact, lie about their USB bandwidth compliance and how many devices they can handle. So you try to put 3 or 4 high bandwidth camera sensors in there and see how well that works. On a lot of motherboards, they just feel. And you have to go get a USB PCIe thing. That was quite the headache compared to just plugging in a headset and having inside-out tracking. On the HTC Vive side, obviously, some people don't mind, but from a consumer perspective, for a lot of people, uh, wall mounting base stations in the corners of your room that have to plug into a power socket, and when you turn on, have a spinning motor that makes a noise, not consumer friendly for a lot of people. That's why so many people were excited about the Rift S and these headsets as well, because of the inside out tracking. So credit where credit's due, they did pull it off. Now they cheaped out on it in that there are only 2 cameras facing forward, so your controller kind of tracking range was not good enough, which was one of the big issues these headsets failed. The other thing is that these were designed to be as low cost as possible. They, again, an innovation, introduced fast switch LCD to the market, right? Before Oculus Go, a year before Oculus Go, these had the single LCD panel with fixed IPD. Most of these headsets, of course, right? The irony, of course, despite the fact that these are all kind of, it's an ecosystem of devices. All these companies are making their own headsets. They're all different. This, and this, and this. These were all the same thing. Just like they were almost identical. They had the same displays, pretty much the same lenses with some minor variations, and they are the same thing. No integrated audio. They're just different designs, same kind of head strap. Samsung, of course, with the Samsung Odyssey, as many of you will know, what was distinctly different. It did have built-in audio. It had IPD adjustment. Most importantly, it had OLED panels. And again, when we're talking about like Windows MR introducing it first, this was the kind of OLED panel that would eventually go in to Quest 1 and the HTC Vive Pro, but it was introduced in the Samsung Odyssey, right? Samsung's own panels, Samsung gets it out there first. So a lot of firsts, but not quite in the right way. The resolution, was not what PC VR users were looking for. The tracking range was not wide enough. Arguably, the biggest kind of miss here was the controllers were terrible. They were really bad. If you haven't used a Windows MR controller, you won't believe me in just terms of, it was as if someone said, Mr. Employee or employee that working on this controller, what you need to do is make the cheapest possible VR controller you can. Look at Touch, the Oculus Touch that everyone loves, and make it half the cost to manufacture. And it feels exactly like that's what was directed to the people who were working on this. And unfortunately, when it comes to VR, where you're literally holding this thing the entire time, the ergonomics of it in your hand matter. This is how you're directly interacting with virtual worlds and objects and environments and interfaces. That's just not a good idea. So some really interesting decisions from Microsoft here. Some very innovative technology to bring inside-out tracking to market first. But they cheaped out. And so despite the fact that these headsets were sold for as low as $200 a time, sometimes in crazy sales, I think they went down to like $150 at the very minimum. They never really reached a serious amount of adoption. The quality bar just wasn't there. And obviously what some of these manufacturers wanted to do was introduce higher end models. Samsung did it here, but they were constrained to Microsoft's tracking system of 2 cameras. By the time you did get around to being able to do 4 cameras with the HP Reverb and HP Reverb G2, which are great headsets. With the Reverb G2, for example, with its 4 cameras, by the time you got around to that, it was already too late because you already had this shift in the market to Quest and then Quest 2 coming out with standalone wireless capability, being able to connect to SteamVR completely wirelessly at a very low cost. And by that time, the market for a kind of dedicated headset that still had non-ideal controllers and it didn't appeal to the super enthusiast because it doesn't have SteamVR tracking and the support for all of the kind of body tracking. It was kind of stuck in an awkward middle position. So Windows MR never caught on. The Reverb G2 was a good headset, but still just no market adoption. Last year, at the end of last year, Microsoft removed support from Windows 11. So if you did get that update, you can literally no longer use these, not even on SteamVR, because, to be clear, pretty much right after these headsets launched back in 2017, there's a SteamVR driver, but it's like a shim, right? So you're running the Windows MR runtime, and then it communicates with the SteamVR driver, which communicates with SteamVR. It's a kind of middleman between the headset's native runtime and SteamVR. Same way Oculus Rift was supported on SteamVR by Valve. Valve made the only difference is that Valve was the one that made the runtime there to get the shim, sorry, whereas in Microsoft case they made it intentionally. So you could use it on Steam, but not after this update, right? So you can't even use these headsets today with the current version of Windows 11 on Steam, because the core runtime isn't there, so the shim has nothing to talk to. So that brings us to the news. The news here is that one Microsoft employee has decided to take this into his own hands, and he's working on a native SteamVR driver codenamed Oasis for all these Windows MR headsets. So it is a replacement for that core runtime. He says that it is the result of deep reverse engineering alongside a combination of luck and persistence. And he says that while his work isn't breaching intellectual property laws, it does depend on his internal knowledge from working on these. So for that reason, he's not going to release the source code in case some of that does somehow breach an NDA or other obligations, is what he says. So he kind of has the go ahead to do this. He claims he's not breaking, he's not literally copying the source code, but probably the methods come from things that he learned at Microsoft. So from that basis, he can't go out and release this open source. He does claim it will be free though, and NVIDIA only for now, because AMD controls their direct mode, but he's in talks with AMD. In terms of who is this person, we will have discussed him many times in this show because he has released a lot of stuff for the PC VR industry. Matthew Buchianeri. Oh my God, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this name. Buchianeri. Matthew Buchianeri. I always just refer to him as Matthew in conversation, so I'm very not used to saying his second name. He is a very experienced developer who has worked on the PlayStation 4 at Sony, the original PlayStation VR at Sony, Falcon 9 and Dragon at SpaceX, HoloLens and Windows MR at Microsoft, where he now works on Xbox. In his spare time, at Microsoft, he contributed to the OpenXR spec. In his spare time, he developed OpenXR Toolkit, which was this way of kind of hacking in foveated rendering and some other advanced OpenXR features into PC VR games. He doesn't develop that anymore because he believes the best way to do this is for games themselves to implement these features. And he was a big kind of reason why games like DCS and Flight Simulator do have that support now for foveated rendering. His tools show how it was done. Then he kind of said to these developers, here's how you do it in your engine. So, he also developed VDXR, Virtual Desktop's OpenXR runtime. We have Guy Godin in the comments here, who I'm sure has worked with Matthew for, this VDXR runtime and a lot of other things. So this is a very significant person in the industry. It is crazy how much value this one person has delivered. They are very, very, what's the word here? They are massive supporters of the idea of OpenXR, not just the core spec, of this idea of openness, of cross-compatibility, of industry standards. And so obviously they were kind of, LL is saying, yes, he's a 10x engineer. He is definitely a 10x engineer. If you haven't heard that term, you can Google it, but this is someone who is by far and away the 10 engineers in one. So the amount of value that he has contributed to this industry is incredible. And I wish I was better at pronouncing certain names, because this is a very important person that we've covered many times. And yeah, for this, as I said at the start of the show, the fact that this isn't released yet, but let's believe him based on what he's put out in the past. The fact that he's able to get these headsets working again, to do a native SteamVR driver, to literally turn these paperweights into usable products again. That some people have been selling these Windows MR headsets for like double digit dollars, like $50, $70, because they're useless on the modern version of Windows 11. So for this to kind of turn this around, this could actually like double the resale value of these headsets, maybe triple in some cases if they start working again, especially if they work on, as he describes, directly with SteamVR. He's not re-implementing the Windows MR runtime. He's doing this as a native SteamVR driver. You'll be able to just plug these headsets in and install this driver on Steam, just like you would with PlayStation VR 2, and it just works on Steam, right? Like there's no going through all of the kind of Windows MR hassle on the other end. There's no kind of having this double home system solution. Really, really remarkable feat. And we have Guy Godin here, again, the developer of Virtual Desktop, for those not aware, saying, yeah, Matt is the GOAT. That is what the kids say to mean greatest of all time. He's super knowledgeable. So Matt is the GOAT, the greatest of all time. He's super knowledgeable. And again, the context there for anyone who missed it is that Matthew developed the VDXR runtime for OpenXR, which if you don't know what that is, it's an option in Virtual Desktop. Sorry, I think I said the wrong thing here. Yes, the VDXR runtime for Virtual Desktop. It's an option in Virtual Desktop that lets you bypass SteamVR. You have direct OpenXR communication between Virtual Desktop and the game. And in some cases, that can improve performance. And I've seen this firsthand. So you remove SteamVR as the middleman there. You see the trend here of getting rid of kind of these middle time shims and just going directly from your core runtime to the game itself. So I think we are almost ready to move on. Yeah, so Arlen is asking a question. AW is happening, I wonder, before someone writes an XR proxy attendance app where someone wears their Quest at a location at home and can attend on my Quest via their camera. Yeah, so I mean, I think like on a technical level, this is something that could definitely be pulled off. The challenge, I think, there is actually more economic and cultural. So, they sell tickets to these conferences. That's the reason that like these events aren't even live streamed until sometimes after the case. They do put up a live stream. Sometimes specific events will choose to live stream, but like the talks given, the idea is so that people will pay to show up. Of course, you can say they could buy virtual tickets. Of course, that's something they could do. But then from their perspective, I'm sure they would wonder, well, are people going to not buy the full price physical tickets? It's a real challenge. I agree with you, though. It's something they should do, and I'm sure it will happen over time. Yeah, so I think on the Windows MR thing, the last thing I want to say is I'm sure it's interesting that this happens after HP pulls out of the market. I wonder what their agreement is with Microsoft. I'm sure HP was very unhappy with how Microsoft worked out as a partner in this particular space. Obviously, they have a bunch of different partnerships with Microsoft that are very successful. I just mean in this particular space, they obviously started with this headset, and they had the Reverb G1 and G2, and they finally got those kind of 4-camera tracking. They were in a good place, and then kind of Microsoft to literally pull the plug and take the support out of the OS. You can imagine that, like, had this upcoming Oasis driver been there for the Reverb G2's launch, I guess, if someone had made it anyway, even though Windows MR already existed, would HP kind of be more interested in staying in the market? Who knows? Yeah, I think it's a shame kind of what happened with this. Yeah, but I'm sure if you are someone who owns one of these headsets, you're going to be very, very happy with the fact that there is a native SteamVR driver coming out. And I got to say, when I saw this, like when I first kind of saw that this was happening, I was really shocked because, like, on an engineering level, a software engineering level, this is going to be a remarkable challenge. I understand he's pulled off some remarkable stuff in the past. I've brought up his past, so I'm not questioning whether he can do it. I'm just going to say I'm sure he's going to be having a lot of late nights with coffee and such to try and pull this off. So everyone definitely give him your appreciation if you're interacting with him in any forums or if you see him in social VR or whatever, I guess. Okay,
let's move on to talk about AWE then, now that it was brought up anyway. So, Augmented World Expo. I was there, Ian was there, Dom was there. Ironically, there were some interesting things there to see in person, and there are some things I saw um, what's called on background, so I can't talk about it yet, but it's to inform future announcements. So, some things I saw that we will be covering in the coming months. But the biggest announcements from AWE, Augmented World Expo, actually were kind of not things you needed to be there for. The event was kind of massively sponsored by Snap, and one of the coolest things about being there in person is you could try all of these different spectacles experiences. The one they showed on stage was kind of this pool experience where you're playing pool regularly, or what is it you call it in America? Billiards, is it? What do you call it? And it kind of shows you the line of where you need to hit to get into the hole. And this isn't meant, for general play, obviously. That's cheating, but it's meant to teach you over time, the same way you might have this in like golf simulators and things like that. And the idea is that over time you get an intuitive understanding. There were co-located spectacles experiences, which were a lot of fun. And of course, Snap, sponsoring the conference, also had a keynote where Evan Spiegel, the CEO of Snap, came out and proclaimed that they would launch consumer AR glasses in 2026. But that's our second topic for AWE. The first AWE topic I want to bring up just before that is the new Qualcomm chip. So this was the other kind of big company's announcement at AWE. The Snapdragon AR1 Plus Gen 1. These Qualcomm naming schemes are a lot of fun. I can't tell you how easy it almost is to say the wrong name, because let me see if I can actually start by bringing up the chart here. I see first in the comments people are saying that it is called pool there as well. Yeah, I call it pool. I think where was I that it was called billiards? Is that a different game? I feel like it was the same game, but it was being called billiards. But that was in America. Maybe it's different on different states. I don't know. Hello asked, did anything leave you in AWE? Did anything leave you? To be clear here, by the way, folks, I'm quite sleep deprived. I got very little sleep the entire week. I'm obviously traveling over the Atlantic to WWDC and straight over to LA, trying to cover all of this stuff. Flying over the Atlantic. I just got back from a 13-hour flight a couple of hours ago from LA. So I don't know why I can't parse the question. Did anything leave you in AWE? I don't know what that means. Leave me stunned. Headset historian is maybe proposing that makes a lot more sense as a question. Yes, but it's the thing I can't talk about. But I can say that it will be something I can talk about next month. There will be an announcement next month of something that I was able to try privately at AWE. That's what I can say. Leave me in awe. Oh my God. So you're asking me, did anything leave you in awe? The word that's spelled AWE at AWE, the conference that is AWE? That's funny. Okay, I finally get that. It's all just clicked in. What are the chances that the word you think to ask is the acronym for the conference itself? That's funny. Okay, back to the Qualcomm chips in the least confusing lineup of all time. As some people have joked, Qualcomm is second only to Microsoft when it comes to picking names for things. So on the left here, if you're watching, you can see their XR series of chips. These are for VR, MR style headsets. You will know that obviously headsets like Quest 2 and Pico 4 had the XR2 Gen 1. And headsets like Quest 3, Quest 3S, and Pico 4 Ultra have the XR2 Gen 2. Quest Pro had the XR2 Plus Gen 1, right? So it's the same kind of chip, but a little bit upgraded. The XR2 Plus Gen 2 up here is what's going into the Samsung headset for the Android XR headset, as well as Sony's standalone enterprise headset. And it has actually already shipped in Play for Dream. So that's this chip up here. But going to the other side of the chart, you see their much lower power chip for glasses. The AR2 Gen 1 up there is their only kind of publicly announced chip that is suitable for full AR glasses, with like 6 DoF positional tracking and full AR capabilities. But these two chips here, the AR1 series, are for smart glasses non-AR, both displayless and HUD glasses. And to be clear, even this base AR1 can do HUD. The most popular product this is used on by far, and the only one I'm actually fully aware that they have confirmed is definitely using this, is the Ray-Ban Meta glasses. So I'm not going to get into why my hand tracking keeps glitching at this exact point. There's a funny technical reason behind that. But yes, the AR1 Gen 1 is used in the Ray-Ban Meta glasses today. And the new chip they've announced here is the AR1 Plus. So it's for higher end glasses, but the same kind of thing as the Ray-Ban Meta glasses, but higher end. And essentially, while you could use it without a HUD, all of the glasses that are going to use this AR Plus Gen 1 will have a HUD. So they have not confirmed, but I would highly expect that this new chip, the AR Plus Gen 1, is going to be what's used in the Hypernova glasses from Meta, these high-end, reportedly $1,000+ glasses with a HUD from Meta that are likely to launch in October. It's also what Google was probably, but again, not confirmed, probably using in the Android XR glasses prototypes that they were showing at I/O with the HUD, probably all this new chip from Qualcomm. So how does it compare to the chip in the Ray-Ban Meta glasses? So there are kind of a couple of changes. Firstly, they say it's 26% physically smaller. And for most devices, that doesn't matter. But for glasses, that actually does matter. The size of the chip is actually now a factor for the design. And they say that this 26% smaller footprint will make it easier for companies to either have slimmer glasses arms, not as thick and clear that it's a technology glasses, or the same thickness with more battery life, right? They also say it uses 7% less power to enable longer battery life, but those two are sort of marginal changes. The other improvements are to like the chip itself. So the ISP allows for higher quality image and video capture. Interestingly, if you remember, Bloomberg's Mark Gurman said that Meta internally considers the current Ray-Ban Meta glasses to have the capture quality of, is it an iPhone 11? And they hope that Hypernova will be more like an iPhone 13. So this chip is one of the key reasons. Capture quality on mobile devices is more about the chip than it is the camera. Sure, you do need a better sensor, of course, and when you get a better phone, a lot of the time it's a better sensor. But just as much, it's the computational photography. It's the ISP is the part of the chip. You'll have heard of, these different parts of the chip. We obviously all know GPU and CPU. A lot of you all know NPU, the neural processing unit that's used for machine learning tasks. But you may not know that the other chip that's used in your phone and a lot of other devices that have a camera is the ISP, the image signal processor. And that's actually what determines things like the capture quality for images and videos. On headsets, it's also related to how they kind of can do things like pass through. It's involved at some points in the chain. So yeah, the other thing, arguably the biggest flagship feature that I haven't said yet, I'm saving the best to the last, is that the NPU is now capable of running small language models fully on device. And that is what Qualcomm showed in a demo at AWE. So today, these AI glasses, as these companies call it, these smart glasses that have AI assistants, whether it's Meta AI or Gemini, these assistants don't live on your glasses. They don't live in the little arm of your glasses. They already do the speech recognition, the speech to text, and the output on device, right? They use these very small models so that they can do the speech synthesis and the speech recognition part. But the actual middle point, the processing, where a large language model is taking in your input and figuring out the output, that's all done on servers, very high-end GPUs, and in Google's case, TPUs, which are its kind of custom NPUs on its servers, tensor processing units. They're doing the hard work and coming up with a response. And that's great, okay, in the sense that you're then getting access to extremely powerful compute, despite the fact that you're on glasses. But there's a problem. Well, there's two problems, right? The first, from a consumer perspective, is that this requires an internet connection. So if you're ever in a place where you don't have internet, so say you're walking around and you've gone down into the underground or subway, whatever your country calls it, the underground train system, and you don't have internet for a second, and you ask a question of some sort, that's not accessible, right? If for whatever reason you find yourself without internet, this assistant that you're relying on, it's not that it can't, obviously we all know that it's not going to be able to do internet things, right? It's not going to be able to, like, go and send someone a message or kind of pull something from a cloud service. But in terms of just asking a quick question that would be in the training data anyway, that's not possible. So with this small language model, Meta's Llama 3.2 1B, 1 billion parameter, on device, it works entirely without internet connection. Now, then the advantage for the company is that they're not paying a server cost for each query. And so this is obviously something that they can scale much more practically into a business. So that direct use case there of not having internet is useful, yes, but I think this points to something much more significant. Small language models on device are how we are going to get AI NPCs in games. There's been all of this hype about LLMs for NPCs. You'll have seen the little demo they made of like a Stardew Valley style world by these researchers where everyone had their own little life and they're talking to each other. And there was this hype like 2 years ago even of all our games are about to have AI NPCs. We're not going to be walking past the same Skyrim NPC that says the same scripted thing over and over again. We're going to have natural conversations. And some people may wonder, well, why didn't this happen, right? Why do we not have a single major video game where the AI, the NPCs are driven by these large language models? And the answer is, of course, because the cost. These experiments cost a lot of money. All of these viral videos you saw of people doing this to simulate, swathes of NPCs, tons of dozens of NPCs, all with their own internal lives, they're costing like dollars a minute. And so that's not a practical, scalable system for a video game, especially not an offline single player one, right? Imagine if Bethesda was paying dollars a minute for you to talk to Skyrim NPC. It's not practical, right? Of course, as well as the internet requirement that anytime you wanted to play the game, even for these rich single player worlds where these AI NPCs would make a lot of sense, would require an internet connection. So it's on device language models that are going to deliver this. All of these kind of conversations with the AI NPCs, they're going to have to be processed on device. And of course, it's ironic that the first device that Qualcomm really makes a big deal out of this being a kind of supported feature where they're really optimizing down to the firmware and driver level for is, of course, these low power glasses. But I think it shows you the direction the company is looking in, right? And I don't think it's going to be too long until we see the same example for a headset where you can do an even bigger model, right? This is 1 billion parameter. It's a very small model, but you can imagine like how far are we off until headsets can do this? In fact, there is one headset that will be able to do this, as we'll discuss very soon, Apple Vision Pro with visionOS 26. Apple is doing a small language model on device that any developer can use for free. So, if the economic argument doesn't make sense to you as a consumer, think about it as a developer. And I'm sure the developers in the audience, you may want to implement an LLM-based feature for whatever reason. Maybe you don't, but if you do, you're going to run into the first obvious reason of, hang on, I have to pay for every single time the user asks for it. I can't build a business off that. But how does the practicality of introducing an LLM or SLM, I should say, in this case, into your app change when it's free? When the cost is the battery life. So the user is paying for it, obviously, every time they plug in their headset, it's on their electricity bill. It's not magically free, but it's a direct payment system. People are used to the basic economic model that the more you strain a tech device, the more its battery goes down and the more you charge it, and you're paying for that through electricity. Maybe a lot of people don't even quite kind of fully kind of acknowledge that that's what they're doing, right? Like when you are um, using a device like a Switch or a Steam Deck, that depending on what game you're playing, can either last 8 hours or 2 hours or even 1 hour if it's a crazy demanding thing. The more demanding a game you're playing, the more you're paying in terms of your cost per hour through electricity. But that's the kind of point here, you're moving that cost on. So I think this is a very interesting trend. Wayne Lynch is saying, could you run one of those on a 5090 or something? NPCs, LLMs? Yeah, you can. Of course you can today. The issue today is that you're using a lot of the hardware that's being used for the game itself. And so the current structure of like a gaming PC, when you're doing AI workloads, you don't have, in the vast majority of chips, still a dedicated NPU. You have the GPU that is acting as an NPU, which of course it can, right? An NPU is just like a very specialized type of chip that is part of these chipsets. But the GPU can still do the same thing in a more generalized sense. So the kind of the model over time is more and more of the CPUs that you buy for your PC are going to have not just a CPU on them, but also an NPU. To get this to really work in a kind of unified way, we need to get into deeper discussions about unified memory, right? The big issue with the gaming PC architecture today is it is still this separate VRAM and RAM, and that without that unified memory, some of this more integrated stuff is tough. But when you talk about coming back to like chipsets, for mobile chipsets, consoles, they're unified memory. Apple devices, right? Mac, it's all unified memory. This architecture starts to make a lot more sense because then you can offload tasks to the NPU without straining the GPU. So you can imagine like a Quest 4 or whatever, right? And if it's 2027, whenever it is, it doesn't matter what year it is, but you can imagine it coming out with a vastly improved NPU, just as it has each time. I talk about how Quest 3 had a twice as powerful GPU. The NPU in Quest 3 is 8 times more powerful than Quest 2's. That's the kind of pace you're seeing on NPUs. So you can imagine that happening again, and you can actually run an SLM on the NPU. Today, that NPU is already doing a lot of tracking tasks, so it's pretty damn heavy already in terms of its workload. There's not a lot of stuff that you can kind of run plus because it's doing, your hand tracking, your controller tracking, your inside out tracking, a bunch of other kind of stuff is running there. But once you get more overhead in that in future hardware, you can start to maybe run language models on there without running on the GPU, without stressing the GPU. So that's kind of the answer to that kind of question. Yeah. So I'm saying LLs. I can't tell if you typed "can't" by accident or you are skeptical. You're saying I can't see S. Oh, sorry. Again, you're double negative. You're saying that I can't see SLMs not being essential feature that's used in just about every game in the future. I completely agree with you. Yeah, from NPC chat to help, absolutely. Yeah. It's pretty obvious that the PlayStation 6, one of the core features is going to be you can run language models on device to power your NPCs, right? I would be shocked if that's not a core feature of the PlayStation 6, as well as all future gaming systems. It's quite clear. I've tried these demos where you can plug in your own API key, and you're paying yourself, right? Again, if you scale this up to using these demos to not just drive the conversation, but also drive the NPC behavior. So they're actual, what Bethesda calls radiant AI in their games, of the AI kind of walking around and choosing their decisions. All of that is being simulated, and then the NPCs are having accurate ambient conversations. I've tried these demos. Again, dollars per minute at best, sometimes tens of dollars per minute. It's depending on what kind of model you want to use and what level of fidelity you want. Once you start to kind of use this stuff on device, that becomes no longer an issue. So yeah, Qualcomm's big focus is starting here with smart glasses, because that's how people currently are using language models in terms of on Qualcomm powered devices in the XR space. But I definitely expect to see the same thing for headsets as well. And just before we move off this topic, I want to come straight back to this chart, just so we're all kind of getting a moment to soak this in. Could you imagine how difficult it is for me to not accidentally say one of these chips with the wrong name of the other, given how close these things are? You can't imagine how many times when I was writing this article, which is very funny actually. I'm writing this article like just after WWDC, so I've tried all the Apple stuff. I'm writing Apple stuff. Qualcomm comes in and starts announcing this, and I'm literally like running between the hotel and the WWDC to write. And sometimes I type XR instead of AR because it's so, you know, similar in some ways. And yeah, it's a tough one. So this XR1 is the one chip I didn't explain what it's used in. By the way, it was used in the Vive Flow, not Quest One. There's a misconception that Quest One used the XR1. It didn't. It used the Snapdragon 835. It was directly out of a mobile phone chip, and it's actually more powerful than XR1. It's kind of like it's between XR1 and XR2 in terms of performance. XR1, there's also an XR1, I think, in the Megane X Superlight, believe it or not. For some of their onboard stuff, they just use like an XR1, kind of overkill, you could argue, but because it's a PC VR headset that is tethered all the time. But yeah, so we do expect that it's likely that that will be the chip used in Meta's Hypernova HUD glasses, but we'll have to see whether that's really the case. Okay, on to the next topic from AWE, and that is Snap Spectacles. Snap CEO Evan Spiegel got up on the stage and said that specs are coming as a product next year. So Snap has this very long history in smart glasses, believe it or not. If you haven't been keeping up with Snap, this is not some company coming out of nowhere and saying we're going to take on the giants. Snap actually, between 2016 and 2019, was making non-AR camera glasses. Years before the Ray-Ban Meta glasses, they were doing the camera aspect. And they actually had some really cool, unique stuff that is better than the Ray-Ban Meta glasses. So the Ray-Ban Meta glasses record in kind of like a portrait orientation. What's the word I'm looking for? Aspect ratio. The Snap glasses, these spectacles, the product you could buy, it was the same kind of pricing as Ray-Ban Meta, recorded in circle, like a 1-to-1 aspect ratio circle. And then you could crop into it where you wanted. But if you opened it in the Snapchat app, if someone put it on their Snapchat story or sent it to you as a snap, you would see it based on the orientation of your phone. And as you rotated your phone, it would stay such that the real horizon of the captured image stayed aligned with the physical horizon of what you're seeing. I'm explaining this very badly, but you can kind of understand what I'm saying. As you rotate your phone, it's as if you're pointing a camera at the real world. It stays fixed. The image does not appear to rotate. Obviously, the irony is that it is rotating, right? It's that if you do just have an image on your phone and you rotate your phone, it's rotating from your perspective because it's not rotating from the phone's rendering perspective. But with this, it renders it. So regardless of what angle you had your phone at, the screen would always be filled by the capture through this kind of 1-to-1 aspect ratio. Very, very cool stuff. They were doing some really interesting stuff with those spectacles. One of the models even had like 2 cameras, and they could do like once after you captured it, you could add like stereo stickers and stuff. Pretty interesting stuff. But they didn't catch on at all. It's interesting to think why, right? Because the original Ray-Ban stories didn't catch on either. It seemed that there was some threshold where the Ray-Ban Meta glasses did catch on. Some people would argue it's because the AI feature, right? It wasn't just camera glasses, it was also AI. Some people argued the audio. I think the audio is really important. To me, I very rarely use the camera of my Ray-Ban Meta glasses, but I use the audio all the freaking time. As I say on this show, I use it to walk around a park and listen to an audiobook or a podcast and have nothing touching my ears. I use it for every single phone call I ever take now. Because again, nothing touching my ears, so I can hear myself fully. I'm not a fan of overhead headphones. I don't think it's natural to not be able to hear your own voice during a conversation. And the other thing is the microphone on it is excellent. As I've complained to Meta before, the microphone in the Ray-Ban Meta glasses is so much better than any Quest headset, which, again, bizarre, but it's one of the best microphones in like a wearable device that isn't literally just a microphone, as in, you're not literally wearing like a microphone, as in a general purpose computing device that just happens to have a microphone, I've ever tried. It blows AirPods out of the water. If you take phone calls on your AirPods today, you're doing a disservice to the person that's taking the call. If you take your call on the Ray-Ban Meta glasses, not only will you have a great experience with nothing on your ear, but the person on the other end goes, "Wow, how's your mic so good? Are you like on your PC setup?" And I'm like, "No, I'm wearing these glasses." So I think to be clear, the reason I'm bringing this up is because these original Snap Spectacles, the product they had, did not have audio capabilities. It was just focused around the camera, and so I think you need all these things in one. It has to be an audio glasses plus camera plus AI for it to be useful enough, clearly, because the Ray-Ban Meta glasses have sold millions of units now, and they're very popular. But moving on to the AR aspect of this. So in 2019, they released their final pair of spectacles. There were 3 generations of these smart spectacles. Then they decided to make AR spectacles. Confusingly, the same name still, spectacles, but these were developer kits, ones that we've reported on quite widely. If I can bring up some images here. In 2021, they released their first AR spectacles dev kit, and some of the specs are certainly interesting, to say the least, or should I say, were widely ridiculed. So this is this first generation of AR spectacles because they have a tiny 26-degree field of view and a 30-minute battery life. So Snap's approach that makes them unique compared to what the likes of Meta is doing is that they are fully committed with no room for changing to fully standalone. Coming back to that discussion earlier in the conversation, what is standalone? What is fully standalone? Snap is not interested in glasses that have a puck, wireless or wired. They want a device that is entirely on your head, nothing else. And that's amazing. And that's what we all want in the end, right? Everyone wants that in the end. In an ideal world where we could wish technology into existence, we obviously would want that. The problem is to do that with the technology of the 2020s of today, like we're in the 2020s, there are a number of compromises you have to make, and it's not clear that we're there yet. So this, again, I want to be clear, what's on screen right now is from 2021. This is their old development kit from 2021. So 26-degree field of view, 30-minute battery life. But, standalone device, it's running Snap OS. It has hand tracking, more on Snap OS later. Then, last year, in September, they came out with the second generation of AR spectacles development kit. And this is the current one that they were demoing at AWE. They had so many of them there. They were the main sponsor of the event. If any of you have been to an event with a main sponsor, you know what that means, as in their names everywhere, their demos are everywhere. There were, you could not go to this without trying specs. There were spectacles, I should say, spectacles. That's what the dev kit is called. There were a bunch of them out there. And so really interesting pivot here with the second dev kit, the one that came out in September. The original dev kit was just made available to select developers. If you got it, you got it. If you're in the know, you get it. If you don't, you don't. This new one is a new strategy, of course, where we've talked about this before. You cannot buy them, but you can, if you are a registered developer, rent them for $100 a month. So anyone who's a developer right now, if you're a VR developer, an XR developer, if you really want these things, you can get them for $100 a month. You can have them in your home and play around with them and build whatever you want, right? And it significantly increased the field of view to 46 degrees. Still, as I've said many times in the show, not good enough. But compared to 26 is like a joke. It's laughable. It's not, for this, it's not practical. 46 is getting into the territory of what, HoloLens 2 is. HoloLens 2 is around like 52. Magic Leap 1. It's the kind of standard you expect from these transparent optics. Again, not good enough for consumer devices. That's why we haven't seen consumer AR see-through devices yet, but it's that kind of no longer horrendously terrible threshold it's gotten to, and the battery life goes up from 30 minutes to 45 minutes. But they also had a massive trade-off here, as you can see in the image, where they went backwards in form factor. So the weight almost doubled, and it got so bulky that it's like, are these even glasses anymore, or would you call this a headset, right? Are these Their spectacles is the product name, but would you call these glasses or would you call it a headset? As I said at the time, it's where these kind of this categorical thinking of like glasses, headsets, goggles, visors, it all kind of falls apart when you get into these margins like this. Like it's clear that you can't really call this glasses in the same sense that you would call like the Ray-Ban Meta glasses, but it is still, I guess technically describable as glasses. That's a debate for another time. You can kind of see it more clearly here. It is, quite big and bulky in person as well. I don't find this comfortable for long sessions. Yeah, it's one of those things where the form factor was certainly surprising. However, of course, to Snap's credit, for all of the criticism this was given of, oh my God, look at this, look at the state of this. How can they do this when Meta's putting out Ray-Ban and Orion demos? This is a development kit for developers. It's not supposed to be a product. That's what brings us to the news of the announcement of the product. Because Evan Spiegel, the CEO of Snapchat, says that the product will be called Specs. So they're getting rid of the spectacles, that's the dev kits, Specs. And he says it will be an ultra-powerful wearable computer integrated into a lightweight pair of glasses with see-through lenses. Specifically compared to this dev kit here, he said that it will be much smaller form factor, a fraction of the weight, and a ton more capability, while running all of the same software that developers have been building for this. So that is a massive claim. I said at the time, I almost had to take a double take of, did he really say that? A much smaller form factor, a fraction of the weight. These are big claims. And obviously, they're saying we tried so hard to get some detail out of Snap. They're not giving details yet. They're not even showing a render, so we don't have a picture to show you of the actual, specs. So all we can do is show you a photo of either the dev kit or nothing. The problem is that then we're discussing this and you get this idea in your head that this is the product, but it's not, right? This is the ugly dev kit. It's going to be very interesting to see if they can somehow pull this off. And I want to be clear, they confirmed us. They confirmed this is not with a puck. It's still fully standalone, the product specs. So if Snap does pull this off, they will be the first major tech company to arrive at consumer AR glasses. Spiegel did reveal that they have spent $3 billion so far developing this. That is in contrast to the estimate that Meta's probably spent somewhere on the order of $30 to $50 billion developing its AR glasses so far. So you're talking an order of magnitude difference, but that doesn't mean anything in itself. The efficiency of the company does matter. You could absolutely argue that Meta's spending could be up to 10 times less efficient. But it's clear this is not just some startup throwing together parts from, Chinese assemblers. Snap, as we reported years ago, bought its own waveguide company. It's making its own waveguides. It's making its own OS. And as I've said before in all my demos, I'm remarkably impressed by Snap OS. I think Snap OS is a really interesting architecture for AR that makes sense. And I think it's, I said earlier, I was going to say, what is the positive look on this in terms of why would you think maybe they can pull it off? And then what's the negative? Why do you think maybe they couldn't? The positive side is the OS. This is not some bloated, laggy, Android with some AR shit added on. This is a made for AR operating system that has an architecture that is more similar to something like visionOS. And many of the advantages that we often talk about for visionOS apply here as well. So it's a theme we have on this show where, because of the constraints and what works well in VR and AR, for multitasking, for power efficiency, running more and more of the core functionality in the OS itself rather than each app has major advantages. On Quest today, every app is an island. As I always say, each app you're using is running its own instance of this massive bloated game engine. And each of it's doing its own thing. So when Meta improves their interaction SDK, right? And so they improve the way that like an interaction works, or they upgrade something, or they increase like a rendering thing. Any of these cool new features where we say, Meta's SDK now lets devs. The problem is that you don't get that out of the box. You say, when do I get this? The answer is when each specific developer of each specific app goes and updates this SDK and recompiles and goes through all of the hullabalooza and updates their engine, sometimes their engine version, the new version of Unity, the new version of Unreal. And so realistically, you get it in a couple of months and a couple of apps. A couple of months, a couple of apps. When you do things when you have a different architecture like visionOS, visionOS supports both, to be clear, right? You can do apps that are their own island. You can still do that, but it does have the ability to have these apps that are much higher level things that exist in the shared space, where all of the core functionality, the rendering, the lighting, the interactions, the spatial audio, all of these little things are actually handled on the OS level. It's as if you're running one giant app, and each app that you think you're running is like a mod for this app or like an add-on for this app. That's a bad analogy, but you get what I'm trying to say here. SnapOS is a very similar architecture. A lot of the core interactions, a lot of the really base stuff is done in the OS, and as well as the advantage that when this gets improved, it updates automatically, right? If Apple improves something in visionOS, every app that runs in this shared space gets that improvement automatically. You update the OS, and it's done. That's it. The OS level is handling all this. It also means massive consistency, right? Every app isn't trying to reinvent the wheel. And just to kind of hammer home this point, the rendering part, right? When you build an app in the shared space for visionOS and you want to place a 3D model on a table, you don't have to do the figuring out of how do I light that relative to the room, how do I cast a shadow on the table, what do I do when the lighting changes? The system just handles it. It just gets handled. You want to figure out how do I do the positional audio? Do I have to do some ray tracing around the room? No, you just spawn the sound at this location, and the system handles doing all of that for you. It's similar with SnapOS. So there's a trade-off here, to be clear, and I'll get into that in a second. I'm sure some developers are going to bring it off, but one of the advantages of this is that the OS can be tightly integrated at a low level to do this stuff performantly on very low power hardware. Like, for example, a low power Qualcomm chip in a standalone pair of AR glasses. It also means that if you ever want to run multiple apps, you can do this without having to essentially run multiple instances of a game engine, right? If you wanted to theoretically do 3D multitasking with the Quest architecture, something you can't do, right? Augments field. There is no augments on Quest today. If you wanted to run two 3D apps at the same time, you'd be running these two instances of the game engine that don't talk to each other. They don't even understand that they exist. You could have some APIs between them for sharing basic info, but it's not like you can somehow run two games on the same instance of the compiled game engine at the same time. That just doesn't make sense with the current way that software architecture works. But if you're doing that on visionOS, I'm running 10 different volumetric apps, and they're all running alongside each other with almost no performance impact, because it's the same core runtime in the operating system that's handling all of them at once. Same thing with SnapOS. So today you can't 3D multitask on SnapOS, but that's not a fundamental architecture issue. That's just the performance isn't there yet, but they can, once they get to more performant future hardware, that becomes by default. Other things that you get by default is colocation, right? It's not like, oh, did the developer implement it right? Do I have to launch this Quest app and wait for 5 different splash screens over 30 seconds and then go in and find a fiddly little menu and find a fucking invite code and go, oh yeah, my code's AB12. Can you type that there? No, it was 12, not 21. Yeah, hit OK. And okay, are we finally going to get into the same space together? No, you hit, you're in the same room. You click share experience. The other person gets a system level pop-up. Someone is sharing an experience with you. You click OK and you're in. That's how it works, as I'll say soon, in visionOS as well. They've just announced the same thing. So colocation, again, because all of these things are handled by the OS, it can all just be done seamlessly, all be handled friction-free. There are so many advantages here. And yes, I'm going to bring up the trade-off because I'm sure at least one developer has brought it up, because it means that there's less developer freedom. You're not just able to run arbitrary code directly on the whatever you want, right? That's a massive loss of developer freedom, and that's an important trade-off. But in the specific instance of running apps on standalone AR glasses with no compute puck that have to somehow run in a computer that fits into the thickness of your glasses arms. I think this is a worthy trade-off. And I think the approaches of just trying to get full fat Android, running on AR glasses that are, just running whatever code developers want and running Android apps that are designed to run on at minimum phones that are, several times more powerful with literally 10 times bigger batteries. It's no wonder that no company trying to do that approach is trying to do fully standalone, that they're all doing compute pucks. They're all kind of moving the problem of, okay, we can't do this. It comes to a wider point that modern computers are almost never slow because of the hardware. We have hardware today that your gaming PC is like more powerful than every computer in the world a couple of decades ago. But software has gotten to the point where it's the constraining factor, and we can go into much wider discussions here. But John Carmack has often kind of hinted at this, that like the issue of mobile VR was never like, oh, the chips just aren't powerful enough. If you had given the game developers of the 90s that were writing their code and sometimes assembly, sometimes like low level low level C++, writing their own game engines for each game, essentially, they would have, if you'd given them a VR headset like a Quest 3 and they were able to use their same tools for the sake of the thought experiment, they would consider it a supercomputer, right? They would pull off incredible things. And you do see this occasionally when developers like go really low level. You see it in like Red Matter 2, where they customized Unreal Engine specifically for mobile VR. And you can see that like you try Red Matter 2, it feels like you're playing like a full-fledged like PlayStation 4 level game, right? Like it's you don't think you're running on a mobile chip. There was that Mage game we reported on that used their own custom engine to do 120 FPS physics with hundreds of dynamic physics objects. So the wider point I'm trying to make here is that the software architectures that are considered to be the way things are done, because that's how it was always done, are not necessarily going to be practical for AR glasses, and you're going to have to think of a different approach. Some companies are just saying, screw it, we'll do it on a puck, and that's how it'll work. And others are saying we need a fundamental rethink of how operating systems and game engines work. Rethink of where is the game logic running, where is the data layer, where is the engine, what is the OS versus what is the engine. This blurred line needs to be rethought, I think, in some cases. Yeah. So, I just to reiterate my thoughts on the current Snap spectacles that is out here, this current dev kit. I've said this before, I've tried it multiple times. We don't want to review it because I'm not going to review a developer kit like this. It's not fair, I don't think, especially when they have a consumer product coming next year that they haven't told us when we get to try it, but they have told us we will be in the first group of people to try it. So as soon as I can try the actual product they plan to sell you as a consumer, I will review it. But right now, I don't think the hardware is anywhere near good enough. It's the same problem with all of these waveguide systems. It's been the same problem since HoloLens 2, since Magic Leap 1. I've said this before, the first time I put on a HoloLens 2, the first time I put on a Magic Leap 1, every time I think, am I missing something? Like, did they forget to turn the field of view on or something? It's like, is this really what everyone's raving about? It's so limited that it's like, this is not a product. And I guess that's why we don't have these products, right? Why these were only for enterprise. And yes, Magic Leap 1 was for consumers, but nobody bought it. The field of view is still the Achilles heel. And it means that you can't do the productivity use case because you can't see all your screens at once. It means that for any kind of immersive gaming, you lose object permanence. The virtual pet, as Ian always likes to say, is the great use case for this, but you don't see it unless you're looking at it. It's a strange thing to have a view of the real world. So it's not like VR where you're cut off on the periphery. You do have the periphery, but objects only exist when you're looking at them. And it's just never really struck with me that works well. It's a cool tech demo that while I'm looking at them, they're there. But as soon as I look away, they're not. And of course, you can design around it by doing these like giant arrows that point you to where to look. But I don't know. I mean, one of the games they had at AWE for the demo was a cool co-located experience where you're kind of going around and what was it like going like this maybe to shoot little energy balls at these targets that look like darts targets and they're flying around, but like you don't see the targets unless you're looking at them. So you're spending your time looking for targets that are revealed by seeing them. And I guess that's a fine gameplay mechanic, right? You can build a game around that where things are only there when you see them, but I mean, it kind of takes away a lot of the gameplay of these kind of things of planning, right? Where if you imagined a hypothetical system for the sake of this thought experiment that had an unlimited field of view, right? A 200-degree field of view, whatever. Part of the fun of the gameplay of a system like this is, oh, do I go to this one next or this one? What order am I going to hit these, enemies or dart targets, whatever it happens to be that are flying all around me? Am I going to move my body this way and then go like this? It's not like that with this. It's I turn around and just what I happen to see is what I happen to shoot at next because I don't know if there's anything else anywhere else, and I often say on the show, Ian and I talk about the Pokemon battle thought experiment or kind of benchmark where if we were to both be wearing these glasses, and I'm not just singling out Snap, I mean anyone who's doing these waveguide-based glasses today, and go to the park and play Pokemon, none of these systems currently would allow us to have a Pokemon battle where I can see both my Pokemon and Ian's Pokemon at the same time. I can look down at my Pokemon and it exists. And then when I look to Ian's Pokemon, mine moves out of my field of view and only his exists. And this is only for small Pokemon, right? If you're talking about any large Pokemon, you can never see the Pokemon at once unless you're at a significant distance away. You will never see the entire creature. You'll only see a rectangular segment. And I think it makes it even more harsh, you have to remember, because it's not like a nice kind of circular oval VR field of view. This is a very harsh rectangle where these I'm trying to maybe mimic the exact size. Obviously, this isn't great representative, but this is kind of it, right? Like you're seeing the world through this slice and anything that's not here disappears. And I'm sorry to repeat my example over and over again, but the example I had when I first tried these glasses, which just was so kind of summing up the entire thing, was the whack-a-mole game. I've brought this up so many times. I apologize to the regular viewers, but it's a whack-a-mole game where you use your fists to smash the moles on the physical table in front of you. But the issue was that I couldn't see the entire game at once. So I had to go like this to constantly be able to see all of the moles and then, use this ability to kind of have an overview and then whack them while moving my head like this. And as I said before, of course, you can fix that problem by just scaling down the game to fit between the field of view. But then, your fist is going to hit multiple at once. Maybe you could do it like a finger push the moles down. There are so many fundamental issues you run in with field of view. So the biggest question I have for the specs is, do they have a much wider field of view? Again, this prototype 46-degree diagonal. Meta's Orion prototype, which is unshippable, as we've discussed before, unshippable anytime soon, is 70 degrees diagonal. We expect that the consumer AR glasses from Meta will land somewhere between 50 and 60 in 2027. So where is Snap going to be? It's certainly an interesting question. I think waveguides are going to be super useful for heads-up displays, for HUDs, simple HUDs, for quite a while. But this kind of thing. But when it comes to having 6-off objects around the room and things like that, I'm just skeptical with the current field of view. And I think I'm not the only one that thinks this. I've put HoloLens 2 onto people's heads, and they've had the same kind of reaction of, is this it, really? The classic marketing mix-up with Microsoft, of course, was where they showed that Minecraft demo of the entire table being filled with Minecraft with HoloLens 1, which had a very tiny field of view, kind of similar to the Snap Specs AR1 dev kit. And people looked at it and kind of saw this tiny little segment of this Minecraft world come up at once, and they were like, hang on, this can't be it, right? Yeah. Let's have a look at some of the comments here. Ben Goodson saying, I enjoyed my time with the Meta Ray-Bans and can see where it could go, but they nailed the utility of that device. It does not need a screen. That's an interesting one. So I got to disagree with you there. I don't. I think there are a lot of ways in which a screen could add stuff. To start with notifications, okay? Currently today, you can have your Ray-Ban glasses read out your notifications, sure, but you don't want every notification to have to be read out, right? Like just to see whether it's worth your time. There's this kind of process we do of notification screening, okay? So say you don't own a smartwatch, you just have your phone in your pocket and it buzzes. And you happen to have a job that involves your phone, so you need to check your notifications, or maybe you have a family member that you care for whatever reason. You need to make sure that if a notification's there, it's important that if you miss one, it's very important. You take your phone out of your pocket, you check, is this the notification I care about, or is it something I don't? If it isn't, you put your phone back in your pocket. One of the core use cases of a heads-up display on smart glasses, which again, we're not talking about these full AR things, we're just talking about these coming category of between glasses that just have this fixed HUD, is just notification screening. You see what the notification is, and you decide, do I want to bother opening it? Do I want the AI to read it all out to me if it's a long message or something like that, or do I just not care and I can just dismiss it? The smartwatches that exist today can obviously do this, but their screens are not big enough to see it all at once. So you can see who it's from, I guess, by looking at your wrist. But seeing the entire message and getting a context doesn't really have the screen real estate for that. And also, just looking down sucks. I think one of the big advantages of these technologies is that you can keep looking up, and from both a convenience perspective and posture, that's going to be a great thing. Everyone kind of walking down the street like this, I don't think that's going to be good for our backs on this scale of decades. Genuinely, I'm not even joking at this point. Like walking around like this all the time and in the public. Maybe it's not like that in your town and city, but in my town and nearest city, I see almost everyone on the street with their neck craned down onto a phone. That's going to have huge advantages for kind of health and ergonomics and practicality. So that's just like the core use case, notifications. Then you imagine things like navigation. I always say that my North Star use case for these smart glasses is actually just being able to know where to go next when I'm navigating on foot in a city without, again, staring down at my phone like this. I've tried it on a smartwatch too. It sucks. Some people say, oh, just use the turn-by-turn directions on AirPods. Maybe if you're in a, no offense, but American grid city where it's just, a big grid of lines, sure. But in a lot of cities are a lot more complicated than that, where you come to an intersection of like 5 different walkable paths and turn left or take the next left is not an instruction that has any meaningful information for you when there's 5 ways to go and there's 3 lefts, right? So that's something I think could be very useful as well at a minimum. Then you can also imagine, more kind of mundane stuff like when you take a photo, you can see a preview to make sure you framed it right and got the right moment. Things like that. As well as being able to, use it as an interface, obviously, to browse music. Say with Meta's glasses, the idea is they're going to pair it with this neural wristband, so you can use your finger like this and kind of swipe along. You can imagine using it without having to take off your phone. But even for those core use cases, I think this could be interesting. And I wonder, to bring this back to Snap, I wonder if Snap will focus on this too, because everything we've seen from Snap around spectacles, it's all full sixed off. But what you have to realize is that, like, even when you imagine using your consumer AR glasses in the 2040s that are everything you want them to be, they're the magic. They look like, Ray-Ban Meta glasses, but they have full sixed off AR in the 2040s. Like most of the time, they're not going to be in sixed off mode because you don't need it, right? You'll have it off. The screen will be off and the tracking system will be off for most of the time. Maybe you'll be doing some low level computer vision stuff, sure, for the AI, but I'm saying like in terms of like doing a full like environment mesh and full perfect tracking. I don't think that's going to be on all the time for practical battery life reasons. Same reason your phone screen is off most of the time in your pocket. But then you get a notification and the HUD fires up. Okay, so you're kind of it's HUD glasses for maybe a huge amount of the time, and then occasionally, you sit down on a bus, you sit in the coffee shop, you bring up your virtual screens. Then you're going into sixth off mode to position them. Or, of course, you go and meet someone at a cafe and you play a game of chess together on a virtual board together. Then you fire up all the sixth off. So it's a mode that is like the maximum mode. It's like when you're playing a 3D game on your phone, using the GPU to its maximum power. But most of the time you're using your phone, for a message or, check an email or something like that or whatever. I take a call. So the thing I haven't seen anything from Snap about yet is like, where's their strategy on that, right? Like, they've talked about all of the ways they're making it a 6-DoF device and how developers are using this, but from a practical product perspective, for these specs next year, what's their take on the HUD and the HUD that we've seen from like Android XR demos from Google and this old demo from Meta, which is the only time Meta's ever actually shown what their HUD might look like. And again, this was years ago, so I'm sure it could have changed by now. So yeah, they'll be interesting to see. And again, I'm not talking about a product. I'm not saying I expect Snap to make like cheaper glasses that are HUD glasses. I'm just saying for their current AR glasses specifically. So are there any other questions or comments on Snapchat? I see Nick the G saying Magic Leap 2 has a 70-degree field of view, same as Orion. Yes, but with a multi-layer glass optics that are a lot thicker and heavier. So what I always try to say, it's like there's some sentences in this industry where you have to put a bunch of caveats in so that people kind of like say, well, technically, this did this. Orion is the only fully integrated in true glasses form factor see-through AR device with a 70-degree field of view. And all of the words in that sentence matter. So yes, there are non-integrated prototypes, like lab bench prototypes. You've all seen these, and they're literally like a giant bench in a lab. Prototypes of 70-degree field of view. Yes, Magic Leap has it in this kind of, as you can see here, like very thick. I can actually bring up the whole optical stack for you if you want. Very thick and heavy solution. That is fine for their use case, because when they were making this headset, as their primary focus, it was for enterprise, right? To be fair to Magic Leap, they were the pioneers of the puck, right? They had the full on, arm strap, fanny pack, whatever you want to call it, puck, and up to this. But this is not true glasses form factor, right? And that's not what they were designed around. It was designed to be like, again, it's that blurred line where you could kind of call it glasses, I guess. If you took this part off, especially the back, you could kind of call it glasses, but it's not really what it is. It's a headset that's 230 grams, I think, compared to like the 100 and roughly grams of Orion. So you're talking about like more than double the weight. So you also kind of, when you do that multi-layer glass solution, transparency is also a problem, right? So, if you have a glass waveguide lens like we expect to be in Meta's shipping product in 2027, and you get your classic 50-degree field of view, you get like maybe 95% transparency, so you can see through them. I mean, the screen is off, right? We're talking about the screen being completely off. You can see through them, the real world, 95%. Ironically, the silicon carbide lenses that give Meta's Orion that big kind of 70-degree field of view actually are a little less transparent. They're down to like 85%. And so the kind of the thing you want to do in these glasses is, yes, you want the field of view to be great and all of the display to be great, but when you're just using them as glasses, which, as I just said, most of the time you're walking down the street, you're not actually having the display on at all. You need them. If you want this to be an all-day wearable product, it needs to be a great pair of glasses first and foremost. No pair of AR glasses can be a mainstream all-day use product without being a great pair of glasses powered off. The great thing about the Ray-Ban Meta glasses is that when you run out of battery, they're still glasses, right? They're sunglasses if they're sunglasses. They're prescription glasses if you're your prescription. You run out of battery, who cares? You just keep wearing them and they work as glasses. If you have to take a massive trade-off to, transparency, viewability, if the waveguide does things like kind of speckles and distorts the light that you see, that's a huge problem. It's an unsolved problem for all waveguides for what it's worth. It's probably one of the biggest kind of like open questions to, can this whole idea of AR glasses for all day use even work? But we'll talk about that another time. But yeah, so it's interesting. It's also why like birdbath optics, even if you ignore the whole being really kind of forward from your face issue that I always kind of harp on about, even if you didn't care about that, right? Even if you were to say, okay, social acceptability will evolve and we can be totally fine with this, their transparency is terrible too, right? And I'm sure you'll say like, yeah, they have electrochromatic dimmings that you can vary the transparency, and you're right. But the fundamental trade off with bird baths is the dimmer the optics, the more opaque the display, and the more transparent the optics, the more transparent the display. So if you want to show any amount on like a X-ray glasses, if you want to show any display of any kind, regardless of even if you did want to do a HUD, if you wanted to come out with like a hypothetical product that used bird bath optics for a HUD, you would still have to dim the whole display. Now, yes, there is segmented dimming, which Magic Leap 2, interestingly, is one of the products that kind of introduced. And that can kind of do like an interesting approach to these products they're having these trade-offs. But that's adding more weight and more cost and more complexity to the solution again. So then you get thicker again lenses and heavier lenses, and at that point, like, yeah. So I mean, look, what I've kind of been saying recently is that like bird bath optics are super cool for like a midpoint between VR style headsets and these waveguide glasses, but they're not either. They're not either, and they're distinctly not able to be these outdoor all day wearable AR glasses that we all kind of dream of. See the comments here. Having a little bit of lag loading my comments here. Gigon says the X-Real Pro aren't bird bath, David. Okay, so I own X-Real 1 Pro. This is like, it's like a technicality, right? They are still fundamentally bird bath. You can call them flat prism. Whether or not you call flat prism a type of bird bath or distinctly new is, I think, semantics. To me, I have in this room with me right now the X-Real 1, which uses bird bath, and the X-Real 1 Pro that uses flat prism. They're both the same optics. I mean, I don't mean they're literally identical. I mean, it's quite clear you look at them and they're the same type of thing, right? It's a different shape, but fundamentally, if you're talking about like how does this work to put an image in your eye, it's the same thing with a slightly refined design. I'm sorry, but I'm going to keep calling them bird bath because to me, it's as silly as when companies say, "Oh no, it's not. It's not LCD. It's QLED," and I'm like, "Hang on, it's an LCD with fancy backlights. It's still a liquid crystal display. This is still using the exact same fundamental display technology as bird baths. The difference in use between the X-Real 1 and the X-Real 1 Pro is like a little bit more field of view, like 46 to 52, so those numbers may be slightly wrong, but that's like plus or minus a couple of degrees, so fundamentally it's the same thing with a little bit flatter. And like people have this idea it's going to be so much flatter. It's not. It's like a couple of percent flatter on the grand scheme of things. It's the same thing, just a little bit better. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he had said a story and is saying X-Real even refer to them as bird bath when casually talking to people. Yeah, I mean, so do all their competitors. It is bird bath. It's just fancy bird bath. I'm going to call it fancy bird bath because that's all it is. And I mean, it's a little bit better. You're saying it's much better. I mean, I have them in the room. I have the X-Real 1 and the X-Real 1 Pro. I have them literally sitting right beside me. It's a little bit better. It's the same thing. Okay, it's the same fundamental thing. It's a little bit better. Yeah, but the point is, they're not. It's not gonna like. I'm not. People think I like hate bird bath. I don't. I actually think it's a really cool technology, and especially for the cost, the fact that you can like have a decent sized virtual screen on a plane or a train or whatever. It's a really cool product, and I think it has a big potential market. My issue is not with the product; it's with the marketing, where it gets called AR glasses, and people say, Bloomberg on a fucking headline, "Oh, X-Real Aura is Google's response to Meta's Orion." It's like, no, these are completely different products. They're completely different. One is one that you would wear sitting on a plane or a train or a hotel room or in your bed or whatever, and the other is something that is trying to develop a product that you would wear throughout your day while you're walking around the world with your prescription glasses, to see the world by default with no display, and then add on displays and virtual interfaces when you need. They're just very, very different devices. This is my frustration with a lot of like Chinese-based companies. I wish they would just like, sometimes they have such great products and such sleazy marketing And I wonder if they shoot themselves in the foot sometimes, because my understanding, I've spoken to some people who are like, quite attuned with the Chinese industry, where like it's just kind of normal there, that like you just have to kind of trust that like that the marketing is like bullshit. Obviously, in the Western world, I'm not saying marketing is accurate. Like, of course, marketing is misleading. It's hypey, but like from what I've seen, what I've been shown of internal Chinese marketing, like to the Chinese market, I'm trying to say, it goes to a different level of deceptive, where it's like, I feel like it verges into lying at some points, like, um, like they call them AR glasses. I mean, even look at the way you present Aura. And again, they're not the only company to do this, right? I can point out other companies that do the same thing, like showing it like this. And then you see this Bloomberg article. This is their competitor to Orion. Where's the tether? Where was the explanation of the puck? We had to kind of follow the X reel and go, when they announced this, and go, okay, look, can you just confirm? I know you're not saying anything, but can you confirm it uses a tethered compute device of some sort? And they were like, okay, fine, yeah, sure, we'll admit that. But they wouldn't. That wasn't their initial communication, right? There was no mention of the word tethered was not there. We had to get them to say the word tethered. And then you see this now. Of course, people can point out they're not the only company to do this. Here's Samsung. Where's the tethered battery? Where is it? How many companies do you see, where they show these things without a tether? But I think like at least the compute's on board on this one. At least you could theoretically like put the battery on the back of this, and it would kind of work. But I don't know. I don't mean to single out X-Real, because there are a lot of companies in this space that do the same kind of thing, but that's just kind of the frustration here. And I think like there's going to be so much confusion from consumers here, because very few people have ever worn AR glasses. Well, of course, very few people have ever worn even smart glasses, is what I'm trying to say. And so they're going to, over the next few years, there's going to be so many companies coming out with all of these different smart glasses that have these vastly different capabilities and vastly different form factors and vastly different ability to see the real world and what kind of display they use. And people are going to have no idea what's going on. And they'll, have reference to fiction of, the Tony Stark glasses and things like that, and spy thrillers. And they're like, hang on, which one is this? And what does this do? Is this the same thing as a Ray-Ban Meta? Like, we're all very clued in. But one of the things I really worry about for this industry that I think could have serious ramifications is I think there is two trains are about to smack into each other here. And it is the hype in the marketing around, Meta's Orion and the future AR glasses that are shown off, and all of these concepts from all these companies, and then the actual products that are about to be sold. And be that Meta's Hypernova HUD glasses with this one-eye monocular heads-up display a year after they show Orion off and Meta. I'll call it Meta, right? They say sometimes, Orion is our AR glasses product. I've actually heard them say the word product, and I've said, hang on, no. Don't call that a product. It's not a product. It's a prototype that you're not even shipping as a product. Okay, there's going to be a lot of confusion here. Google, I can call out all these companies at once because they're all effing doing it. Google shows off these Android XR glasses with a heads-up display, and then announces, we're going to make these. We're going to partner with Warby Parker and Gentle Monster, these competitors to EssilorLuxottica, to make Android XR smart glasses. And then, so your obvious kind of conclusion would be, and completely reasonably, oh, well, cool, these companies are making these smart glasses with this heads-up display. And then you go to the fine print. Well, not fine print for us, because we obviously followed up and asked, on the record, like, do these companies have the HUD? And they said, well, no, the HUD is optional. So everything we just showed on screen probably actually won't be in the first products. So again, all this hype, all this seeing, the HUD pop up of the Google Maps instructions, and people go out and buy the Warby Parker glasses, and there's no display in them, for example. Well, maybe, I mean, like, that's not confirmed that they're not going to have a display. What's confirmed is that it is optional for these companies to have a display. So you can see the exasperation here from the kind of massive issues of marketing and capabilities, and we'll have to see what happens. Maybe I'm being too pessimistic. Maybe these companies are able to figure out a way for this to kind of work out. Maybe consumers just naturally figure it out better than I think they can. But I think sometimes we overestimate how much people outside our industry do know about what's going on here. And good luck to to consumers trying to figure all this out when these companies are intentionally being deceptive. Pretty much all of them. I mean, I can't think of any that hasn't been in some way slightly misleading. But we can go into wider philosophical discussions about how today, the attention economy, it's all about hype. What matters is how much hype you generate, even if it's all for, BS, right? Like car companies are out there generating hype for concept cars, right? You have these influencers driving these. I'm just going to call it BMW randomly because it's the one I saw the other day, right? Of like, oh, look at this cool new BMW car, and then it's a concept car, right? Look at Jaguar in the UK, right? They did that massive rebranding, and you can talk about whether you like it or not, but the car they showed off is like, this is our new future. You're like, damn, that's cool. And then you go to the fine print, this is a concept car. This is not going to be produced, right? But that's, like hype, the reality. I think there's going to be a difficulty there. Anyway, let's go on to our final topic here instead of me ranting about the entire industry, and I'm sure burning many bridges accidentally there. visionOS 26. The big news of the week. Apple at WWDC announced the biggest update to Vision Pro's operating system yet, with some truly astonishing new features and improvements that, as I said at the start of the show, when I introduced this topic, showed that this company is committed to this for the long term. If anyone told you that Apple has discontinued Vision Pro, or that it is giving up on the industry, or doesn't care, or that it's leaving, they lied to you. Do not trust them as a source. They do not know what they are talking about. It is quite clear that Apple is in this for the very, very long term. The same kind of long-term commitment that we talk about Meta having, with the one constraint that Tim Cook still does have to answer to the shareholders. So it's not the unconstrained conviction that Meta would say it has, but it is a strong long-term investment that they are not expecting to pan out on the scale of quarters. It is going to be years that they expect this to pan out on. And Apple is very much so, let's just start this topic by saying Apple is very much so aware that a heavy $3,500 early adopter product is not a mass market product. It is not useful or insightful to say that a $3,500 heavy early adopter first generation product is not a mass market product. Of course it isn't. It's called Apple Vision Pro. It's $3,500. It's heavy. It's a first generation early adopter product. You have to think about it more as in like the Apple Lisa or the Apple Macintosh than the first iPhone. As we say on the show many times, the iPhone was the culmination of decades of personal computing. It was the culmination of decades of pocket computational devices. And it brought them all together, arguably, into one thing. It's not, smartphones didn't start with the iPhone because it's a game of semantics where you're defining smartphones as the iPhone, right? If you define like just a device that you keep in your pocket that does computation for you, that has buttons or just, other kinds of interfaces on it, like PDAs existed for decades before then. Calculators, digital cameras, portable GPS, alarm clocks, portable radios, all of these kind of things existed, and they kind of converged into this one device. But there was a long history before then. And that's what I really want us to always just keep in mind when we're discussing visionOS. This is the beginning of a multi-decade new product line for Apple. So that context out of the way, let's get into the big announcements. Some of them are absolutely enormous, right? The first is, as I'm sure a lot of the people who've been calling for this in our audience and in the wider industry are going to be overjoyed at, is of course PlayStation VR2 controller support. So visionOS 26, I should say, is scheduled to launch in fall. Usually Apple releases their operating systems in September and October. The first beta is out. By the time it launches as an actual stable OS, Sony will be selling the PSVR 2 controllers separately. So you will be able to buy them, presumably, and according to the same reports that predicted this in the first place, at an Apple store. you're able to go in, and just in the same way that, I don't know if everyone knows this, but you can actually buy the PS5 gamepad at an Apple store to pair to any of your Apple devices, um, including Vision Pro, right? You can use Vision Pro to play Steam Link, the iPad app on a big screen. You can use GeForce Now with the gamepad. And one of the cool things that they brought in visionOS 26, I guess I'll just say now while we're talking about it, is pass-through breakthrough for gamepads. So right now on both Quest and Vision Pro, actually, you have pass-through breakthrough for keyboards. So if you're in your virtual home environment, you'll actually see the keyboard cut out and pass through, the real keyboard in your hands, obviously, if they're on top of it. Very cool and useful to see the real keyboard. visionOS adds this as well for gamepads, as well as your iPhone, believe it or not. So pretty cool and useful to be able to look down and actually see your controller, even if you are in a fully virtual environment. The only thing you see in pass-through then will be obviously your hands, your arms, and the controller. But of course, that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about the PSVR 2 Sense controllers, the tracked controllers. And this is full support. It is fixed off tracking via the same infrared LEDs under these tracking rings that are used on PS5 and PC. So this is full fidelity, low latency, a 6-DoF VR controller tracking that allows for the same kind of traditional style VR gaming that we all know and love, natively on Vision OS and Vision OS 26. And the first company to announce a major game for this is Resolution Games. You'll know them from a bunch of different games. Demio, for example, they're one of the biggest developers in this industry, and their game is going to be called Pickle Pro. And they are also the developers of Racket Club, if you've played that on Quest 3, which earlier this year added pickleball. And they're kind of leveraging the same physics engine between these two games to do Pickle Pro. Interestingly, I also say they've trained an AI model of players playing pickleball in Racket Club to be the NPCs. So the NPCs will be like, this is actually an experiment of two things at once: track controllers on Vision Pro, and AI NPCs for sports, XR sports games based on real player movement. So very interesting. This is coming out later this year. But as we reported a couple of hours ago, it won't just be on native visionOS apps. So to be clear, visionOS apps will be able to support this on the App Store, even require it. And Apple is implementing a system where you'll be warned, this app before you buy it requires track controllers. Don't buy it if you don't have track controllers. Obviously, that needs to be in place. But you can also use it on SteamVR via ALVR, and they've added support for this in their test flight right now. So if you're a developer who owns an Apple Vision Pro, has the visionOS 26 beta, owns PlayStation VR 2 controllers, and owns a gaming PC, a lot of ifs there, but I think that's actually, at least a few people in our audience, right? You can enroll in the test flight build of ALVR, the open source SteamVR streamer for Vision Pro, and go and use this on Steam right now. You can use this as a SteamVR headset with controllers. Pretty cool. Right now, Max Thomas, the developer who's spearheaded this visionOS port of ALVR, and doing so much work on it. Right now, he's using the index controller models. So you'll see, virtual Valve index controllers in SteamVR Home, but he's working on trying to steal, I guess that's not the right word, but you know what I'm trying to say, the controller models that Sony has in its PSVR 2 driver. So you'll be able to see the PSVR 2 controller models in SteamVR. But other than that visual mismatch, it's fully functional. So yeah, that's really cool to see. There was the Surreal Touch controllers that you could use, and they had their own fork of ALVR. They were kind of Quest Pro style controllers. They still exist. I'm saying where they exist, but they're I don't see those being. I don't think the Surreal Touch people were too happy to see this happen, because this is now going to be cheaper, and all of the games natively on the visionOS App Store are going to be designed around this controller input. Because super interestingly, this wasn't we're supporting track controllers from A, B, C, and D. It's it's for game style controllers, it's just Sony. Now, to be clear, they're not the only track device that Apple has added support for, though. There's also the Logitech Muse. May look familiar. It's a slightly modified version of the Logitech MX Ink that you can already get for your Quest headsets. Logitech's obviously sharing a little bit of R&D between these two projects here. Nothing wrong with that. But it means that you get a 6-DoF tracked stylus on visionOS as well. So we're seeing these from just hand tracking, plus obviously, keyboards and gamepads, to now two different types of track controllers, one for creativity and enterprise and the other for gaming. So that is kind of a very interesting reversal from Apple. Remember that Apple is the company that when they announced Vision Pro, described controllers as clumsy hardware controllers, right? Like they were very, very against the idea. But I think it's quite clear here that they've realized that if they want this to be a serious platform that appeals to everyone, just hand tracking is not going to be there. Again, it's what I coming back to what I said at the start of the show. The future is not one thing. It's not the future is hand tracking. The future is controllers. The future is eye tracking. The future is keyboards. The future is wristbands. It's all of these things in the right context. It's hand tracking with eye tracking sometimes. It's a keyboard and mouse other times. It's a gamepad in your hand other times. It's a track controllers another time and wristbands in other times. All of these things together in the right context. Some of them more than others, but not any of them disappearing. I don't think any of these things I just described are going to magically disappear anytime soon. I think they'll all have their use cases. So I think it's great to see Apple acknowledge that too. Yeah, and I see, some people are saying right here, like Biggs is saying, I see it as accepting they were wrong about XR gaming. I think that's right. I think that's right to say. Yeah, they probably did underestimate how much gaming does matter here. But as a lot of people are saying in the comments, it's great to see that they have reversed course. So that is kind of feature number one for visionOS 2, these track controllers from Sony for PlayStation and Logitech. The next one is these all new personas. So these are significantly more realistic than before. Let's see, I really thought I had an asset ready here, but it doesn't seem to be loading right now. You can go to our coverage on UploadVR.com and there's the comparison clip showing the before and after of the personas. You can also, like a lot of tech outlets have shown them, Apple executives have even posted with their personas for the first time. Well, one Apple executive, I should say, not plural. That to me signifies something significant. This is not good enough that an Apple executive has posted publicly a video of them as their persona. None of them did this with the old personas. And I think I did get to try this, in headset and everything. And it is really, really good. It's crazy that they've pulled this off on an M2 chip in a shipping product today. It's like, in many ways, this is very close to the promise of Meta's codec avatars, except it's shipping. And you generate them by just holding the headset in front of your face for a few seconds. It's really, really cool. Even if you didn't have any of this other stuff, like this in its own, these all new personas are a massive and significant upgrade for the platform. And they get rid of that kind of ghostly, blurry look of the old personas that I always kind of said, it's not quite there yet. I think this is there with a point of if this headset wasn't so heavy, this would be a really good way for people to have meetings. Like companies to have meetings instead of always paying thousands of dollars to travel across the world. This actually crosses that threshold. We always have this kind of talk about when does tech pass the threshold that it's actually good enough. And I think personas has just passed the threshold for telepresence with these new personas. It's not perfect yet. It actually looks great. I don't have any criticism by how it looks. But remember how we've always talked on this show about how an avatar looks is actually less important than how it moves. We are more sensitive to things like gait, things like facial expressions and micro muscle movements on people's faces than we are what they look like, because there's quite a wide variety in what people can look like, right? And they can have disfigurements or whatever. They can have, makeup and things like that change the look of their face. They can put face paint on, but you still think that that's a human being, even when they have face paint on or whatever, right? But if it moves wrong in a way that human face muscles just don't move, regardless of who it is, no matter what, that's just not how our anatomy works, then your brain is that's not a person. Same thing with motion, right? If the motion of their body and their, same thing with gait, the motion of their body and their arms are off, you can tell that that's not a person. So where I still think there's some work to go here is with the animation, right? How they translate face tracking data into the facial movement of the avatars. That's still not quite there. That's not at the threshold of like, this is good and this is so good that like it's like, damn, this is better than a video call in all ways. But the appearance, I think, is there. I think they've gotten there for the visuals. And I think like maybe with the next generation of headset, perhaps they can get the tracking good enough that that part is solved too. And yeah, I just, it's stunning that they've pulled this off of the M2. I'm going to say it again. Wow. I remember I was I was there at WWDC in the crowd. I saw them show these personas and everyone there. And I'm not talking about Apple people. I just mean people, everyone, skeptics of visionOS and Vision Pro were like, wow, there was an audible gasp moment. That's what we're talking about with this. Greg asked a really interesting question. Will VR download broadcast with personas at some point? So here's the complexity here. We could, of course, have a FaceTime call where we're appearing as our personas and you're seeing it like a webcam grid, but instead of webcams, you're seeing our personas. Because right now, obviously, how this app works is that Ian and I are running an Android OpenXR version on our Quest headsets, right? Where we're in VR. And then there is a PC version running, which is what you're seeing. You're seeing the PC version that is it's a third participant. It's a third person, but it's not an avatar. It's a camera. I see it right there, right? It's a camera with a 2D view, but it's in the same session. The issue is, if we were wanting to do this with the spatial personas, right, where we're in 3D and have the shared sense of space, we would need that camera. And so you can't actually do that on a Mac today. I'm going to investigate, like obviously, ARKit is coming to Mac and things like that, and Mac OS spatial rendering. Maybe that's changed to visionOS 26. It doesn't seem to have in my initial experimentation, but to me, as far as I'm aware, please somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but the only way for me to actually have a third person, as in a camera that is seeing inside the same spatial personas session with a shared 3D coordinate space where we're using, a whiteboard together or whatever and pointing, is to have a third Vision Pro that is acting as the camera. And for cost and complexity reasons, that's not currently practical, as well as the fact of Kyle doesn't have a Vision Pro, so if he had to pop in, that's not going to work. But of course, we could just do it when it's me and Ian, but I think we would need a third Vision Pro. And I don't know if that's worth it for that, because again, it wouldn't just be a third Vision Pro. It's one that someone is specifically positioning and then, live streaming from, right? We obviously have to figure out how do you live stream from a Vision Pro. It's that in itself would be a complexity, because normally the way you would do that is that we could cast the view from the Vision Pro there to a Mac and then do it out. But it would be, you can see what I'm talking about when I'm saying it's inexpensive and quite costly. David Bigelow saying it needs a person in it to keep it running too. Yeah, you could probably trick the sensors, right, by we would probably have to put it on a dummy, a mannequin, and have it sitting there. Because I do think it does check for more than just proximity. It does seem to sometimes in my testing of this, it'll stop running if there's no eye there. So it actually is going to be there's no, so you may have to actually put it into a mannequin with fake eyeballs just to get this running as the third person camera. Yeah. So yeah, Onakazi says, I swear I remember seeing personas here near the launch of ABP. Yeah, so we did it in the way I described before, where it's a FaceTime call where the third participant, the PC side, the recording side, is just a PC, right? But if you appear like that, it's not a spatial persona. It's just your persona broadcast as a 2D webcam view, So that's not really what people want, I think. Then that loses out the advantage of a shared space, right? We're not pointing to a whiteboard together. We don't have our, I don't know. It's not like being together at that point for the audience. If we're turning towards each other, then especially in that sense, if we are in a shared space, the viewer, you on the PC, is seeing us just two webcam grids looking in at each other. It's not and then we can't even control which side is which, so they might switch over or something like that. It's yeah. I would love for Apple to solve this by bringing spatial personas in a 3D sense to Mac. I tried this with a simulator and couldn't get it working, so it doesn't seem to work in that context. Maybe I didn't do it right. If there's anyone who's listening to this right now or watching this that is hearing and understanding exactly the issue I'm bringing up and thinks that they do have a solution, so you have a way to do a spectator cam for the spatial 3D personas that works in the visionOS shared space, not just a full space app, a shared space that we can practically use that doesn't require Third Vision Pro, please let me know. I'd love to be. I'm not even saying I'm right about this. I'm just saying in my investigation, I haven't found how to do it. I'm sure there maybe is someone who has found a way to do it, but my understanding is that that's not how it works. So like you can't even use the spatial personas as like an SDK in Unity or anything like that, to be clear. Like, so it wouldn't be in this studio. We'd have to do this as a completely separate app, which I'm fine to do, right? It's worth it if it's doable. But right now, how it kind of works, again, coming back to the discussion earlier about what is handled by the app and what's handled by the OS, funny that we're back on the same discussion, is that like to be with someone as a spatial persona, the only app that gets access to face and eye tracking raw like that on Vision Pro is FaceTime, Apple's own. To be with someone as a spatial persona, you are in a FaceTime call with them. And then other apps that you use the SharePlay API to share their content, but they don't like have access to the personas, if that makes sense. Like they're not seeing the other person's persona. They're just being like, I'm a 3D CAD app and I am sharing my space. And they're doing things like the layout, right? They're saying, I want to have, one person here and here and here, right, in a circle, or maybe a semicircle, or maybe they're all in a line, or maybe they're all like facing each other in weird ways. You can lay out like where you want the personas placed and how they're facing each other, but you're not actually, as the app, rendering the persona. You're just saying like, put them here, and the system does all the rest. So it's not even clear like how you can do that. Like there are apps, of course, that let you do like a third person view of your own persona, but not when I tried those in SharePlay, and they don't show the other person's persona. They only show mine. If I bring my like third person camera up here, it's not like a third person camera into the entire reality kit session. It's just into like where you are at this point. But again, maybe there's a solution here that I don't know of. Yeah. Yeah, Tigers is backing me up saying, yeah, in a dev discussion, Apple apparently said spatial personas is FaceTime only, and Zoom and other apps can't even use them. Yeah. So like, yeah, to be clear, like if you go onto Zoom, you can use Zoom and as your persona, but Zoom gets a 2D webcam texture. Like it gets a virtual webcam of your persona. But again, it's not like real in the sense, real is not the right word. It's not like it's actually like a camera here that's recording whatever happens to be behind you. Like you won't see if I bring a Safari window and put it behind my head, it won't be there in my Zoom call. It's literally just, it's fake. It's just taking a completely separate rendered view of the persona and feeding it up. We got quite into the bogs there, but look, I understand the concern here. I would love to do it, folks. I really would. I would love to. Really, truly would. But unfortunately, it's just not how it seems to work. Yeah. So let's move on to some other kind of visionOS 2 stuff that's very impressive. Pinning, persistence, and widgets. So the flagship way in this was announced was just to talk about the widgets. But widgets are a cool new app type in Vision Pro. It's ironic that Apple's kind of shipping the idea of like augments before Meta. But some of the APIs that widgets rely on are actually usable in other apps, and I think they're just as important. So pinning, for example, you can actually not just only pin widgets to your wall. You can pin any app. I can just bring up Safari, right, and just pin it on my wall. Whatever app I want, bring up a YouTube video and pin it on my wall. I can do it with widgets and have them persistently there. You can also pin like 3D objects now very easily to surfaces. So beforehand, if you pull a 3D model out of an app, someone can literally like text you on iMessage a 3D model in Vision Pro, by the way, and you just pull it out and it's in your space and rendered automatically. But now with visionOS 26, you can easily pin that to your physical table, I guess to the wall or to the ceiling or whatever like that. And apps can use this kind of stuff as well. They always could do it in a manual way, but now there's kind of a more high level, easy way that's designed for that. And then persistence as well. So these widgets, these new types of app that are like clocks and stuff like that, and calendars. The coolest one I tried actually was a panorama. So you capture a panorama on your iPhone and then you put it on the wall, and there's kind of like a cutout in your real wall to behind the panorama. So it's actually as if you've got a window there that's looking out onto the panorama, and it worked really well actually. And it's really cool how well the persistence worked. They also have like much better support for system level dynamic occlusion now, which these widgets use. So the demo I got to try actually with Apple involved walking from the demo started in one room, and I didn't know there was another room. But at one point in the demo, they said, put the battery in your pocket and walk with us. And I was like, okay. And I walk with them, and they bring me to a room, and I open the room, and as I open the door, I see all of the widgets fill out the room, obviously because I'm no longer occluding their view. And I walk into the room, and these widgets are all persistently pinned there. And so, you may think like, this isn't something you're going to wear all day. So what's the point in this? I think the idea is so that you can decorate your work setup. So there are some people today who are replacing their monitor with a Vision Pro, like their triple monitor setup. So you get your office no longer has a monitor. It's just your Mac or your PC or whatever it happens to be, probably a Mac if you're using a Vision Pro, your keyboard, your mouse, and your Vision Pro. And so now you kind of have this view out into the real world, or you're in your environment. Now you can kind of have, as well as just your windows, your calendar over there. So I can now see at all times, like, what's coming up there? What's next week? Oh, that's over there. The clock, like I guess you can customize it with like a world view for if you're working across different time zones at any time, instead of having to like, sure, you can obviously glance down at the time and convert it in your head, but I can have a clock right there on my real wall in the same place every single time I look for it that has all of these different time zones. So I'm thinking, oh, what time is it for Pete over there in Japan? Oh, right, there it is. And then you look back, and of course, just like people love to do today, you have photos of your loved ones pinned on your virtual wall, and then you can obviously have those changed to a bunch of different ones and cycle through them like a slideshow. And you can set up your own little personal office, I think, is the real use case for this kind of thing with these widgets. And obviously there's going to be a widget kit SDK for developers to pull this off. And again, because all of this is done in the shared space with all of the kind of rendering being handled, developers don't have to reinvent the wheel. If the room gets darker, Apple will darken the lighting. If there's a shadow that should be cast here, Apple will do that. If there's an upgrade to rendering one day, all the widgets get upgraded automatically. Spatial audio, if the widget plays some audio, the audio will come from the widget. All of it's handled. The developer doesn't need to reinvent the wheel. You don't need to have to think, did the developer of this widget do this one little quirky feature right? It just works. Yeah. So Tigers is pointing out you can resize them, do your, yeah, that's a great thing. You can customize them. All of this stuff is, it was really cool how well the pinning worked, by the way. It just works. It's really, you got to hand it to Apple. Sometimes their interactions are just so sleek. It was not janky at all. It just felt exactly how you would imagine it to feel, to the point where it's like that thing of when you do something right, people don't notice you've done anything at all. I've tried a million different versions of apps trying to pin things to your wall, right? In terms of just the basic UX that you might imagine is so easy, right? Surely I'm just dragging it around like this. But there's a million ways to accidentally do that wrong. Yeah. So that's pinning, persistence, and widgets. And to be clear, the pinning and persistence can be used in other apps as well. Widgets are just a good example of a system level feature that they've brought in because of these pinning APIs. Next one, truly 90 hertz hand tracking. This is a really confusing one because you'll remember last year they kind of announced the same thing. visionOS 1 launched with 30 hertz hand tracking. With visionOS 2 last year, they said, we're now providing hand tracking poses at 90 hertz. But it turns out that the hand tracking wasn't really running at 90 hertz. Now with visionOS 26, it really runs at 90 hertz. And so that's a lot smoother and better. Quest, if you're not familiar, it runs by default at 30 hertz hand tracking, 30 times a second it samples. There is a 60 hertz mode, but enabling it has performance trade-offs. It means that like developers can't use the maximum CPU and GPU and such. There's also in theory, there's supposed to be a slight jitter trade-off, but I don't really see it, to be honest. It seems fine to me. I think the performance trade-off is what really matters there. And the reason for that is the thermals. It's again down to just how the cameras are sampled and things like that, and how much doing it at a higher rate increases the thermal load. Like the same way on Quest, that using pass through at all on Quest has a thermal cost, as a performance cost. I've said this before. If you enable pass through for any reason in a Quest app, you can no longer use the maximum GPU and CPU frequency. Because again, we talked earlier about this thing called an ISP, the image signal processor, that's bringing in all of this data that's running harder, and other parts of the chip are running harder as well. So it heats up too much, takes too much thermals. Vision Pro is a more kind of spread out thermal architecture. It has two fans. There's actually two fans in Vision Pro, not just one. Regular viewers will know how important that fan is. You can see this is a concrete example I've just talked about on Quest, where the hand tracking can't run as fast because of how the thermals of sampling these things at such faster rates. Yeah, Tigers, I did mention that you can lock any window in space to a surface, but good thing to point out as well, and volumes as well. Yep, and like just to be crystal clear, that all that widget stuff that we're talking about, being able to pin and stuff, it's not just for widgets. It's just that widgets are like this kind of like like mini apps that are designed to be kind of there on your wall and kind of run in the background, and the whole UX of them is designed around that. Yeah. Okay. Next one, volumetric spatial scenes. You see this up here. So in visionOS 2 last year, Vision Pro got the ability to turn any 2D photo into a 3D photo using machine learning. As Ian likes to point out, of course, it's not the same as a real 3D photo, as in it's not the same quality of depth. We sometimes offhand call it 2.5D. That's not technically accurate in any way. It's just an offhand term. But it's pretty cool, right? That capability from last year. Still great, much better than the 2D to have some depth. And Meta just started rolling this out on Quest for Instagram specifically. So if you use the Instagram app on Quest and you're scrolling through it, you can actually, if the feature gets rolled out to you, hasn't rolled out to everyone yet, convert into 3D. Spatial scenes is the next level. People have often been asking on this show, as you rightly should, we're talking about Apple's spatial photos, Apple's term for 3D photos. We talk about Apple's spatial videos, Apple's term for 3D videos. But this is 3D in the sense of stereoscopic. It's not volumetric. And that's what spatial scenes is. It's volumetric photos. So this is probably one of the most impressive things I've ever tried, for what it's worth. This turns any 2D photo, when you click on it, and it takes maybe 3 to 5 seconds, into a volumetric 6DoF scene on device. No internet connection required, no cost. Your photos, it's built into the Apple Photos app. It's also built into Safari. We'll talk about that in a second when we talk about the Safari improvements. This is so good. I was shocked by how good this was. This is remarkable. This is one of the most impressive system level features I've ever tried, for the fact that because this isn't someone else's photos. This isn't something that someone went and did with a $5,000 camera. This is every single iPhone photo that you've ever shot in your own personal iPhone library, and you can convert it in 3 seconds. All those memories you've ever taken, you can turn those into volumetric scenes and relive them. Again, remarkable they've pulled this off in the M2. I really can't wait till everyone tries this, because I think some people have been a little under indexing on this kind of Vision Pro use case of bringing your traditional personal content in. For anyone that has a family or whatever, if you try this with your family moments, hopefully from fall, when this launches, they'll be able to let you try it on your own iPhone in the Apple Store. Because right now, what you can do with the Vision Pro demo is they'll actually let you airdrop your own personal panoramas and try them in Vision Pro. So if anyone has been thinking about doing a Vision Pro demo at an Apple Store, they are free, to be clear. Go and do it. If you have some cool panoramas you want to see blown up on 4K micro LED displays, might as well. Why not? It's free if there's an Apple Store near you. I really hope that they do this in fall when visionOS 26 is available. Because truly stunning. System seller level feature. Truly. And obviously we can all speculate, where do we go for video? It's a lot, or so, if you're imagining this is one frame taking 3 to 5 seconds, it's quite clear that we're quite a long way off doing this for video. Video being, 30, 60, 90, 120 frames per second, depending on how you recorded it. So you can see how that's far off, right? But there's a path to it. I don't want to put a year on it because you never know with the advancements of machine learning, things happen at crazy paces. But you just, whenever it does happen, you can imagine that being like a mainstream system seller. You imagine a cheaper and lighter vision headset that you can turn any of your videos into volumetric scenes. And then, of course, we can talk about pre-produced videos, right? Movies, literally experiencing a movie as if you're sitting in the room where it was filmed. You can, like, the possibilities here are truly like sci-fi level cool. And I just started thinking about all this while I was trying the spatial scenes, because like you're like yeah, there's a moment in a show called Westworld where it's a flashback to the past where people see the kind of robots in the show for the first time operating, and the kind of investor that's being shown the demo says the phrase, "No way, we're not here yet. Nobody's here yet." And that was kind of my reaction to this. Like, the fact that, again, of course I know that this exists in research papers. Of course I've tried this in open source models that run on your GPU and take minutes. I mean, the fact that this works in one click on a standalone M2 chip in 3 seconds is what I didn't think we were here yet, but we are. Okay. So volumetric photos. I don't know why they've stuck themselves into a weird naming here, I should say, where because they called 3D photos spatial photos, they had to come up with a new name for this. So spatial scenes is what they came up with. They probably should have saved spatial photos for this, because I guess, but whatever, right? I'm going to call them, in an Apple sense, I will call them spatial scenes, but for a general industry sense, I will call them volumetric photos. Okay. Local SharePlay is the next one. So I talked about this earlier when it comes to Snap. Let's see if it's even listed on this. Yes, shared experiences. So in the same way that you have SharePlay over the web, same way that you have a co-location on your Quest headset today, you have local SharePlay in Vision Pro. Mainly oriented towards enterprise, because very, very, very few families are likely to own 2 Vision Pro headsets. But if you do, if that's, if you literally swim around in a bathtub full of money, I guess, that's something you can do now. But the main use case is for enterprise, right? Where they have, I always use the same use case, but it is so many, you'd be surprised how many companies use this and literally swear by how much XR has changed their entire company because of this, viewing CAD models in 3D space. Before you go off and build believe it or not, executives love the fact that before they go off and build a $5 million prototype of something, that they can see it all together in 3D space at 1-to-1 scale in the room together, and all explore it and talk about it and pull it apart and things like that. So you wonder why these companies focus on this so much. You wonder why, like, Sony's headset is so focused on this. It's because some of the biggest engineering companies in the world adopt XR for this one use case and are like interested to the point where, like, because the kind of money they're making, the products they're making, as soon as there's a headset that's slightly better for this, they upgrade immediately, and they're like, we want whatever is the best way to stand in the same room together and see a CAD model and have a conversation together and pull it apart. We'll pay whatever it costs. For these companies, these prices are nothing. So that's what this is primarily oriented towards. And again, as I said about last week, when it comes to WebXR colocation, I'm talking about automatic colocation. Companies already figured this out by using, like, QR codes for alignment or manual alignment where you tap the same point, but this is fully automatic. And just like Snap OS, the UX is seamless. So I tried this again at Apple in the same room with another Vision Pro. Here's how it worked for a 3D model. So they bring up a 3D model in their files. They click share. They click my contact. And on my Vision Pro, I see a pop-up going, they would like to share an experience with you. I click accept, and instantaneously, that 3D model is in the same position, in the same space, lit, and we're seeing it together. We can move it together. So it's using all those same APIs that, again, comes back to the advantage of having so much built into the core of the OS. Apps don't have to update to support this. Any app today that supports remote SharePlay already supports local SharePlay because the OS is doing it. The app just provides, their like data and like basic app logic layer that's kind of handled through RealityKit. Not like, again, you don't have to wait for any app update. It works. Okay. Yeah, Tigers, you're right to say up to 5 people. You're correct. That's a very good point. Yep. And you can have remote people as well. You're absolutely right to say. That's the other cool thing. Yeah, it can be a hybrid. That's a great point, Tigers. Thanks for bringing that up. It can be some people in the real room and some people popping in as their spatial personas, and you all again see the spatial persona in the same place, and it all just works because it's handled on the OS layer. I'm going to be a real broken layer about that for the next decade. I'm sorry to tell you all, but it's quite clear that visionOS and SnapOS have an architecture that understands something about this technology, that have made the right trade-offs, that are going to become a much more apparent as you see companies like Meta and Google try to kind of ham-fistedly bolt this on to Android and try to bring these same concepts in. And yeah, I wonder if if Meta could send themselves a message back in time 10 years ago, would they have said, whatever you do, don't quit your custom OS project? John Carmack would obviously strongly disagree with me on that and thinks that, Android is fine and it can all just be adapted and you can just keep modifying it. Maybe I'm wrong. I would love to be wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they all figure it out. Android XR has all the same stuff, and it definitely doesn't so far, I can tell you, but maybe they figure it out. We'll see. I think the failure of augments shows that it's not as easy as they thought. Okay. If it was as easy as they thought, we would all have our Quest 3 augments today. Okay. So the next one is spatial browsing in Safari. So I kind of hinted at one of the features there. I wonder, is it even in this list here? It doesn't seem to be, unless I am blind at this point. But essentially, you know what reader mode is in Safari or any mobile operating system where it simplifies the page, brings it into like a reader mode. You all know what I'm talking about. This is spatial reader mode is essentially what it is. They call it spatial browsing, but it's spatial reader mode. So it takes the basic reader mode concept and then has the page kind of like ghostly, ethereally kind of bleed out into the real environment and kind of ambiently light your room. And then as you scroll down the page, Safari automatically converts each 2D photo that's in the reader view, right? And you know how it shows the 2D photos is like full width, right? Into a spatial scene, the volumetric photos. So you go onto a website, you click reader mode to read this article that has photos. And as you're scrolling down, like it's like you're seeing into the web page and seeing like a volumetric scene of each photo. And like when I tried this, I was like, you're telling me, like I was saying, this is me to Apple. You're telling me that like these aren't 3D photos. This is just a web page that someone put together about something completely unrelated, and this is all just turning it into this. And they were like, yeah, it's spatial browsing. So wow. So just wow. It's not just your photos. It's if you are in this mode, the web becomes volumetric. The other feature they have for Safari is that they have like a model spec now in HTML. So web developers can embed models in their page. And with the visionOS Safari browser, at any time, you can pull the model out by literally just, pull and just like kind of has a little satisfying, but it comes out of the page and you can place it in your room at 1:1 scale. And you can see where this is going, right? I'm sure you can all see where this is going. You're on a product page for something you're interested in buying and you want to see how it looks in your home. Do you want to go and download one of their specific app or whatever and go to an app store and set all that, download it and wait for it to install and load it up and go through their fucking Excel? Yeah, I'll accept the privacy policy after the 10 splash screens. Or do you want to just pull it out of your browser and place the model into the world with zero friction at all? I think we know what's going to be the most practical way. So that works with anything that uses the model tag in HTML, just the way you'd embed an image, and you just pull it out of the page. And with the same thing we talked about earlier with the pinning, right? Which people were pointing out, you can pin stuff to surfaces. I can pull that out and pin it to my real table as a 3D model and see it in space. Exactly what it's going to be like at exactly the right scale. And again, because visionOS, the shared space, is handling the lighting, the physics, the interactions, the developer doesn't need to do a damn thing. This is not a WebXR experience where they're going and being like, oh, well, I guess I'll need to implement like a lighting system and an interaction system, and I'll go and implement my own and then I guess if this device makes noises, I'll go and implement my own, audio SDK, blah, blah. No, it's just a fucking 3D model you pull out. And when Apple upgrades the rendering I'm sorry to be a broken record about this, but it's so damn important to understand why this is the right architecture. When Apple updates the rendering system, every model you ever pull out of Safari from the instant you do that will be improved like that. The physics system, the way that things are pinned when it becomes, I don't know, a more precise environment meshing, and you want to put something on the very edge of a counter or on like a circular table or something. These are bad examples. The point I'm trying to make is, they upgrade the audio one day to have much more realistic, like acoustic modeling. This device that you've pulled out of the page, it all just works. So very impressive with that. Okay. So that's going to be quite clearly a significant part of the future of shopping. People had the idea of like, oh, VR is the future of shopping in a very like schoolmorphic sense, that you're going to walk around virtual aisles, and maybe, but unlikely. I think the more realistic one is that you're in your headset, you're just using your browser as you normally will. It's turning all the images for the product into 3D volumetric versions, and then the person, one day, a few years from now or whatever, Amazon, you see an article on UploadVR, Amazon now has 3D models embedded on their product pages, and then when you're in your headset, you just pull out those 3D models and put them in your space, or IKEA or whatever, whatever the company happens to be, that you can see what it looks like in your room. And yeah, very, very excited to see that. Okay, so the next one, native 180 and 360 video support. I think that is mentioned here. Yep. So this is so that you can easily use and share and implement things like the Insta360 camera. The one that when we cover, people are always like, are you being sponsored to cover this? No, we're not. I just think it's cool that you can record high quality 180 degree and 360 video from a $500 camera. Apple does too, because that's what they're demoing. That is actually what this is from. This is from an Insta360 camera, where, or at least the demo I tried was, I don't know if this picture is, the demo I tried was, and so you can easily just watch that in your Vision headset, instead of Apple just supporting their own Apple Immersive Video, 8K 3D standard. They now just let you bring this in, and that's across the system. It's native support for developers when they want to, add a video player to their app of any sort. It's in the file system. It's all, you can just play the damn video. It just works. So that's cool. If you have one of those little Insta 360 cameras. I see Plotrek F saying, any news about Meta killing Quest 4? So that was our main topic of discussion last week, and we actually did discuss it earlier in the show. If you want to skip back, or maybe after the show come back and watch, go back to our first section, the Meta section, where we did talk about that. Baroque Dub says, also worth a mention, macOS rendering. Don't you worry, we will absolutely be mentioning that. I'm getting through these one by one. But I love your excitement, because I am so excited about that too. I'm not saying don't be excited. Do. We're going to I've got a long list here. Folders and home view. That's pretty cool. I think there's rumors that Meta is going to do this to Horizon OS as well, so you can put your apps in folders. It sounds mundane, but we all have it on our phones and our computers, so it's useful as there's more and more apps. Unlock your iPhone and answer its calls. Yep, so we have deeper iPhone integration. So you can now unlock your iPhone with your Vision Pro on. The Face ID system is designed now to work with Vision Pro. Not 100% sure how that works on a technical level. I imagine it's just, the classic Apple ecosystem integration magic, where it knows you've got, I don't know. I'm not going to speculate, but you can think of 5 or 6 different ways they could have done that. The other thing is phone calls come through from your iPhone. So you're in your Vision Pro, you're chilling on your bed, whatever. Your phone, you left it down the hallway, it calls. With visionOS 2, like the current OS, you got to go and get your iPhone, right? Or whatever. With visionOS 26, it gets forwarded into Vision Pro. You get a little pop-up, someone's calling you, you gaze and pinch accept, and you take the call in the Vision Pro, and it just automatically works. No integration needed there. OS level feature. I don't use an iPhone personally, but if you do, I'm sure that's very cool. Yes, Tigers points out something very, very important about this wide FOV content support, like the 3D and 180, that they read the camera intrinsic data that's put into the metadata of the file and do like a like scale matched projection to make sure that it's at the most appropriate projection. And as you say, Tigers, yes, placing on a spherical surface versus 2D. Loving the enthusiasm for these features, Tigers. There, yeah. Once you get into the, we got to kind of balance here. How deep do we go in versus getting the show, through everything? But I love the details because there is a lot of detail here in visionOS 2.6. It's you could talk about it for literally hours. There's so much here. Again, you can understand, I'm sure, folks listening, like, why am I saying, like, it's clear that Apple's committed to this. Like, this is not a iOS update where they change the colors and move stuff around. This is big stuff. The next one, the Jupiter environment. I don't know if it's listed here. Yeah, it's quite cool. You're on Jupiter, one of Jupiter's nearest moons, Amalthea, and it's the first interactive environment where you can actually have a little interface that lets you, adjust Jupiter's rotation and things like that for the different times of day. Look to scroll is a feature, yeah, where when you like get to the end of an article, instead of having to bring your hand up and scroll like that, it'll kind of just scroll down based on your eye tracking. Have not tried that yet. Interested to try it. I mentioned game controller breakthrough beforehand. Again, so you're in a fully virtual environment. Like you're on Jupiter's moon, right? And you're playing Steam Link on the giant iPad app, or you're playing GeForce Now or whatever. Maybe let's just say you're playing Steam Link for the sake of this, streaming from your PC, playing Cyberpunk, whatever the hell you're playing, and you look down at your controller because maybe you're new to gamepads or gaming in general. That's fine. People are new to things all the time, and you can't remember exactly where a button is or whatever. And you look down and have a look at the controller. Well, if you did this in Quest today, you would not see a controller, right? You would not see that. You would see like some hand tracking of your hands kind of awkwardly holding a controller. But with visionOS 26, you'll see a kind of oval pass-through cutout of the controller so that you can see it. Apple Intelligence in more countries. If you care about Apple Intelligence in more countries, it's more countries. I don't see a super interesting use case for that. But what's more interesting of the Apple Intelligence announcement, and I hinted at this earlier, is Foundation Models Framework. The Apple Intelligence small language model that runs on Vision Pro is now available to developers for free because it's on device. So in a visionOS 26 app, you now have a SLM, and if you're a dev in these comments or who's used an LLM, that same exact system of APIs where you send a prompt and get a response. That's it. There's no crazy random setup here. It works exactly like if you were prompting an LLM, except no API key, no cloud, no pricing. It's free. It's unlimited. It's on device. Your only limit is battery, right? It's obviously gonna, but that's like any feature, right? It's the old joke that light bulbs in video games use real electricity. Like so that's really cool. It's obviously not going to be the same quality as an LLM. This is a small language model running on device. But for a lot of use cases, this makes it possible to use this tech in a profitable way, right? In a serious business use case. Because whereas beforehand, how do you like manage the billing factor? The fact that your idea that you might have had that would be really cool with a language model could maybe have a cost per power user of hundreds of dollars a month, right? If power users are constantly using it, they could end up using hundreds of dollars of credits. Well, now you can do it on device. Super interesting, and means that right now, I'm sure there is someone right now with visionOS 26, as I speak, building an AI NPC experience that runs entirely on device. Where you're having a conversation with an AI NPC, and it's free and it's on device and it works offline. I'm sure somebody is working on that. So this is a trend we're going to see in coming years of these language models running on device. And Tigers is saying you can use cloud compute too. Yeah, you can use cloud compute too. Yeah, of course you can. Okay. Team device sharing is another cool one. You see it up here. It means you can store the eye tracking and hand tracking calibration data on your iPhone, so that if you're in a company that uses a bunch of Vision Pros, you don't need to make sure which one have I got my calibration data on, because you just walk up to one and click the iPhone prompt and it sends all the data over. Enterprise has been asking for that a lot. Apparently, I talked to an enterprise dev who was like, "F that's there." And finally, not finally, but there's two more things. macOS spatial rendering. This is a really cool one that I think this audience is going to. Well, no, let's talk about one of the ones just before that, actually. There's two more things, and they each kind of have their own little image, I guess, so it makes them easy to delineate here. One is that high-end iPad apps. So you'll be aware that there are some AAA games on iPad that aren't available on visionOS, right? So in theory, visionOS can run any iPad app, but in practice, developers can opt out. And some of the reason that developers have been opting out of some of the bigger experiences to run on Vision Pro is that they have run into memory limit issues. So with visionOS 26, Apple has increased the memory limit available to developers, and they specifically say that this should enable those high-end iPad games to come over. So this holiday season, you could see some of these AAA games that are available on iPad. I brought up some examples here, but to be crystal clear, none of these games have specifically announced. These are examples of games that are currently on iPad, but do not currently run on Vision Pro. But in theory, if what Apple is saying is true, these kind of games could then be running completely standalone on your Vision Pro on a giant screen. So all you need to do on the 13-hour flight, as like I said, I'm only a few hours back from, is bring your controller and you have your giant screen with you and you're playing the game on device. No need for like a cloud network connection, nothing. It's just that it's a self-contained 2D gaming device of the kind that people speculate Valve Decker to be. This is a speculative mock-up by UploadVR, I should say. Obviously, we're just taking a screenshot from the iPad version of this game and putting it on a screen in front of a Vision Pro user. With the keyboard, with the gamepad breakthrough feature, you see how these things are complementary, right? Where you can have your virtual environment you're doing this in. So you're doing it in a cool virtual environment. You're on the moon. Ian's favorite one is the moon. And then you can look down and see your controller. So that's cool. But I get that not everyone's into that use case specifically. The final big feature we wanted to talk about, of course, is macOS spatial rendering. This is Apple's take on PC VR. This is it's actually really an update for macOS, but it's visionOS. Well, it's for both. It's an update for macOS 26 and visionOS 26 that lets developers build Mac experiences, immersive Mac experiences that are streamed onto Vision Pro immersively. So the difference, I guess, between this and PC VR is, well, obviously SteamVR and Quest Link don't run on macOS. So that's difference number one. And this is only macOS. Difference number two is the UX here. It's not like you launch into, like a VR home system environment and launch apps. How this works is that like you would be in Mac Virtual Display, the regular Mac Virtual Display where you just have your MacBook or your Mac screen on a virtual screen in front of you. And during certain applications, you click on like a launch immersive experience button, and then that developer launches an immersive scene. And that scene is then streamed, using a direct point-to-point connection, or using Wi-Fi if it's over a network. The system will find the most optimal path. Apple has end-to-end control of the networking stack and hardware and software of all of these devices, so they can just do all this seamlessly. And then it pops up on the headset. If you're not in Mac Virtual Display, so say it's someone else in the room, or say you just didn't put the headset on yet, when you put on the headset, you'll see a prompt that says accept or decline. It's the same kind of prompt you see when someone starts a co-located experience. It says, would you like this Mac to be able to, I can't remember the prompt, like stream an immersive scene to your headset or something like that. You click accept and boom, you're in. And so it's the same concept of PC VR. You're able to use the more powerful, in theory, processing from your Mac to run a high-end experience. So yeah, I actually spoke to a dev who was playing around with this already. Some of it doesn't work fully in the beta 1. James O'Loughlin is saying that this sounds crazy, and I still don't believe it for some reason. I'm expecting a gotcha or catch, eager to prototype this. Yeah, it's one of those things that sounds so un-Apple. Like I wish Ian was here, because I think Ian was right. Ian said this would happen. I didn't say it wouldn't happen. I was like, it seems unlikely to me. That's what I said at the time. I said, I don't know, it doesn't seem very Apple to me. But I think we've seen that the Apple of recent years is not the Apple of 10 years ago, and definitely not the Apple of 20 years ago. So you can imagine pairing this with a Mac Studio, for example, their desktop computer with like the M3 Ultra, which I think is their current most powerful chip. And yes, before someone goes to correct me, we are in a weird world where the M3 Ultra is more powerful than any of the M4 series because they haven't launched the M4 Ultra yet. It's as if imagine NVIDIA didn't launch the 5090 and the 4090 was more powerful than the 5080. I don't know, like, forget about that in the NVIDIA context. I'm using an analogy to be clear here. Imagine if that would be the kind of situation. So, yes, the M3 Ultra. I can never remember if I'm getting the names of the 4 Apple chips right. I hope I am. The point I'm trying to make is you can get a Mac with a GPU that is like 5 or 6 times more powerful than what's in Vision Pro, a CPU that's 10 times, no, 3 times more powerful in multi-threaded, and a lot more RAM, right? Vision Pro has 16 gigabytes of memory. On a Mac Studio, you can get up to 512 gigs. And this is going to allow for a lot more high fidelity rendering and more detail and more geometry. Now, the main use case for this, I understand that everyone in this audience is going to think gaming, right? It seems unlikely that someone would build. This is a very niche. We're talking niche within a niche, right? Building even a Vision Pro game, that's already very niche. Building a Mac Vision Pro game that requires you to have A, a Vision Pro, and B, a Mac, and C, a Mac that is significantly more powerful than your Vision Pro for it to be worth it. Very niche. But who will care about this, come back to my earlier discussion about shared spatial experiences, is enterprise. And who will have, I can see a lot of people in this audience, for example, James and Biggs is saying, woo, they're ecstatic to see this. I'll tell you who's probably very not happy to see this, and it's Vario and other companies that are currently relying on their differentiating factor from Vision Pro for enterprise being, well, it doesn't have the power of a gaming PC. This changes that. That's why Apple has done this. This means that companies who have built these experiences that are designed around, again, seeing their component, their part, or their product one-to-one. Right? We talked about in that Vario documentary that we covered them putting out, the Honda, I think it is, that builds the entire car as a virtual experience using the Vario headsets. And it's a one-to-one photorealistic representation of the entire car down to every little detail in the interior. And then people go and sit in it with the Vario headset on and look around and have an idea of like, okay, so do I think that like this controls right here? Should this touch screen maybe angle a bit more this way? Do the lines of this window make sense? And before they go and make, a multi-million-dollar prototype again of the car, they can fix all this first time. So these companies find immense value in this use case. I think some people would be shocked by how fast Vision Pro is being adopted in enterprise. A lot of the features you see Apple putting here for enterprise, and they really are making sure that they are kind of catering to enterprise, is because they're seeing rather fast adoption. And I think you'd also be surprised by how quickly it's eating up some of the existing companies in this space. So there are already companies I talked to who they used to use, HTC or Pico or Vario, and they now use Vision Pro. And there are companies who I've spoken to in the past who their only reason for not using Vision Pro was the compute. Like they were using, they wanted their 4090 or they're even like their NVIDIA Quadro or whatever you call the workstation cards. The ability to do this with a Mac Studio, for some of these companies, I think this is going to be significant competition. I think you would be very concerned right now if you were at a company like Vario or around this. Yeah. So yeah, Onakazi is saying, to be fair, if you have a Vision Pro, you're kind of likely to have a Mac PC capable of streaming to it. Yes, but one that is notably more powerful than the Vision Pro all the time. Right? A lot of people are going to have maybe, their M2, their M3, their M4 laptop, but like, maybe you have the M2 Pro, but like, you're getting a little bit more juice then, but like for this to really matter, it has to be like multiples more powerful, right? Otherwise, it's just a little bit higher fidelity. You're not going to you're not going to build the experience for Mac and depend on each time just for that. You're not to lose standalone. You need it to be a lot more powerful, right? Like when you go from the standalone version of a video game on today on Quest versus the PC version, it looks a lot better. You wouldn't go and buy a PC, for example, just because it looks a little bit better. But I take your point, right? There's going to be people that play around with this anyway. I see John Wick saying, "Do you think it's worth it to buy a Vision Pro today?" Oh, God, that's a tough question. No, probably no. Unless my answer remains the way it was before, unless $35 to $100 means nothing to you. And if $100 means nothing to you, like, well done in life. But unless that is the case for you, no. Yeah, if it means something to you, like I expect it means something to 99.9 whatever 9% of the population, hold off for a better, cheaper, lighter version. Not least because, as I've said before, Apple Vision Pro was actually originally meant to ship in 2022. So it will actually be quite a big leap in the next one, we expect. Yeah, so I see Big saying it's my favorite headset but clunky. I was so used to big PC VR HMDs, it didn't bother me, but the complaints are real. Wait for the next gen. Yeah, the weight is a huge issue. You can work around it. Like one of the cool straps is let's see if I can bring this up. There's a CPAP company who made like a strap for Vision Pro that has all these tiny little counterweights in the back, which I guess is cool and kind of solves it. But you shouldn't need to. Yeah, I find it. Here we go. There's this where all of these little like parts are little miniature counterweights. You can see it here without the counterweights, and so you can see where they kind of slot in, right? And you see here's without the counterweights, but when you put these counterweights on, you can kind of make it comfortable, but you kind of have to Frankenstein it out. It's Look, it's amazing, but it's fundamentally ergonomically flawed. There's almost no one I've ever put Vision Pro on the head of that hasn't said, "Damn, it's heavy," instantaneously. You know, I mean, there are other third-party head straps. There are ones that give you open periphery, but then you kind of lose full immersion and things like that. Mastoris Mars points out that the Quest 3 also needs a third-party strap to be comfortable. Sure, but it's not as bad. I can go on a Quest 3 with the default strap for maybe 30 minutes an hour and feel okay. I don't think I would feel comfortable in Vision Pro for more than 10 minutes with the default strap. It's a very heavy headset. It's like a solid 100 grams heavier than the Quest 3, which doesn't sound like a lot until it's on your face. Let's see. James O'Loughlin pointing out that Vario could adapt to the competition from Apple by doubling down on Windows PC affordances. Yeah, you definitely, that would be the strategy there. Leverage everything that matters about being on Windows and not being on the Apple ecosystem and try to, double down there. It's surely what you would want to do in that case. Also, obviously, Vario has certain military and government customers that need their edition that they make that is ridiculously expensive. I can't remember off the top of my head, maybe 15K. Could be completely wrong about that, but it's like designed to comply with everything in terms of having like no wireless chips at all in it, right? No electromagnetic interference. It can go into like secure military and intelligence environments, which requires a lot of certification for obvious reasons. And I don't think anyone's going to let a Apple headset in there, not least because the damn thing's manufactured in China. I don't see the CIA or, MI6 letting one of those into like a sensitive training facility, whereas I'm not saying it's any of those intelligence agencies, but there are, I don't know if I can say, but there are intelligence agencies of some sort that do use Vario headsets in certain contexts, these specific versions of Vario makes that are compliant and designed to run in these highly secure environments. So there are niches that Vario can keep pushing into for sure. Big saying that they want Apple to chase the puffin idea. Yeah, that's super interesting to discuss, isn't it? With Meta, working towards putting the compute into the puck, will we see Apple doing the same? I guess the thing is that Apple is like, so Vision Pro today is a much higher TDP device, right? They are trying to do much more compute. As I talk about all the time when it comes to the thermals and everything. It's gonna be tougher to get Vision Pro's compute into a puck. I think it's not practical to. I don't think they're gonna be able to pocket it if it's like an M series chip. I cannot see how you can get in a thermally sensible way and a device powered by an M series chip inside your pocket. When it comes to like, could they do an A series chip? Yes, of course. But I guess it depends on their focus. I've argued for years that Apple should have used an A series chip in Vision Pro. Now, it would have been a less impressive experience, but it would have been cheaper and lighter. Maybe, what they do is that by the time that Vision Pro 2 comes out, we probably will have an 8 series chip that's as powerful as the M2. So maybe you get something. Okay, so would you accept something that has no performance improvement over Vision Pro? It's the same performance envelope, but it's in your pocket. I think most people would, is the answer to that. But the rumors are that Apple's going for M5. They're going further, right? They're going higher and higher end. Maybe we, so I don't know. Maybe it's not a pocketable puck. Maybe it is like, God, that's a tough UX to sell though, right? It's a puck now and it's constantly tethered, but you can't put it in your pocket anymore. Magic Leap 2 did it, right? We showed earlier in the show. Let's find this here. Yeah, so Magic Leap 2 did it. Gigo is saying, you can do some processing on the headset. Sure, yeah, you can do like the R1 part on the headset, and then do the M part. But still, like if you're gonna take the heavy compute off, and the irony is that like the weight it's not just the compute, right? It's like the thermals around it. It's all like the heat sink, the fan, all that sort of stuff. But you can't fit that in your pocket. And even if you could, where's it blowing the air into? Your pocket? It's just going to heat up, right? Like, it's tough. Yeah, I mean, Meta's going to struggle to even get the puffin puck in your pocket. And that's going to be, with a phone chip. So how do you like, how do you get a Mac Mini in your pocket? That's the question you kind of have to ponder. How do you get an iPad Pro in your pocket, I guess you could say, at the very minimum, right? A big part of why the M chips work in the iPad Pro is that the entire back of it is kind of like a giant heatsink, right? Like it's a lot of surface area for thermal dissipation, and it's not in your pocket. I'm so skeptical about that. But here we go. Here's the Magic Leap image I've been waiting to load. Would they have the courage, to use the Apple term, to have a non-pocketable puck? Could you have a Vision Air that does have a pocketable puck with an A series chip and a Vision Pro that doubles down on heavy compute and says, you know what, we're going to put an M5, M6, M7 in future, etc., but it's not going to fit in your pocket anymore. It's going to be something that you carry around with you. I think Apple might be the only company of the big tech giants that maybe would have the courage again to do that. Nobody thought that Apple was going to do the tethered puck. And because Apple did the tethered puck, now everyone else is going to do it. I think Apple is going to look, if it's the only way to get really high performance into a standalone form factor, which I don't see how else you do it. Where is the hot air going? Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see. Yeah, Gigo is saying you can have a MacBook Air without a fan and it kind of works. It does kind of work, but I have one. I own one with the M2. If you try to do serious demanding tasks on it, go try to play a 3D game on it and tell me how that goes. Step one, it gets so hot that you want to take it off your lap. It becomes like, it's genuinely uncomfortable. Step two, it's thermal throttles. So it gets to the maximum heat that it's going to accept before Apple says, beyond this, we're risking damaging the chip. and then it brings down the CPU and GPU clock speed, and then it brings it down and brings it down and brings it down. It's this we've gone over so many times in this show, thermal throttling. It's the fundamental issue that brings us all away from our dreams of what we want. Unfortunately, it's the reality. So, without fanless devices are cool, but you can't run 3D immersive experiences on fanless devices for very long before everything falls apart. Yeah. Okay, so really interesting discussion here, folks. My battery's about to run out. I also have to go. I also need to sleep. This is going to be quite the sleep. I'm sure I'll be at double-digit hours on my sleep tracker tonight. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. We're really glad that we could be here to discuss all this week's news with you. Sorry about yesterday. Half the Google Cloud went down and took out our server, so nothing we could do about that, unfortunately. But I really wish we could have done that at AWE anyway. Yeah, really interesting stuff. Super excited that Snap is going to actually ship an AR product after 10 years of companies promising AR glasses are just around the corner. We'll see what it's like as a real product, but at least they're having the courage, back to that word again, to actually ship and not just show prototypes anymore. And yeah, visionOS 26, it sets the foundation, it sets the standard. Even if you don't like Apple, even if you don't ever want to use a Vision headset, you can know that Meta is going to have watched that presentation and seen all these features too and said, damn, we need to step up our fucking game. And I'm sure Google did too. So the competition there is going to be good for the industry. I think it sets a new bar for what these headsets can do and be capable of. Volumetric photos, it's not sci-fi anymore, it's real. Photorealistic avatars, it's not sci-fi, it's real, it's in a shipping product. visionOS 26, that'll be here in fall. The beta's out now. And yeah, keep an eye on UploadVR.com. We'll have some more coverage from AWE and throughout the weekend. Thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you in the future. Really good conversation again today. Really, really good stuff. Tough to read the comments and talk at the same time, but I'm very, very happy to see the depth of conversation and enthusiasm, because I promise you I share it. Thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you in the future.